I was dying on a cold hospital gurney while my family popped champagne bottles. The paramedic held the phone to my ear, and I heard the music blasting in the background. I heard the laughter. I heard my own daughter say that cutting the cake was more important than my failing heart. They thought I was just an old man crying for attention. They figured I'd still be there the next morning to foot the bills and clean up the mess. They were wrong. 7 days later, they finally turned up at my hospital room, and I was nowhere to be found. What greeted them was an empty bed and a single handwritten note. The moment my son-in-law read it, that arrogant smile of his disappeared. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories, where real pain leads to real reckoning. Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment and let me know what the weather is like where you are right now. Something about knowing who's out there listening makes this feel less like a recording and more like a conversation. Now, a brief note before we begin. Some details in this story have been shaped for dramatic storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. The color drained right out of his face. That was the instant they understood the account of Dad was permanently shut. My name is Clifton, and 68 years on this earth have taught me one thing above all else. The weapon that cuts deepest is not forged from steel. It is forged from betrayal. 4 decades I spent building things in Charlotte. Construction was my life. The North Carolina sun baked my skin leather tough. Every ridge on these palms tells a story. A wall I raised, a slab, I poured all of it done, so Vivian and our children would have something solid to stand on. I put up skyscrapers, I put up shopping centers, I put up the very mansion where my family threw that party last Saturday night. None of that mattered to them. To those people, I was a checkbook with legs and a dated wardrobe. The contempt had been building long before that evening, but that night was when it shattered something inside me. The occasion was meant to honor my son-in-law Garrett, fresh off a promotion at his investment firm. They held it at Ridgecrest Manor, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, 5,000 square feet of a property I purchased, renovated, and landscaped from the ground up. The deed, though, carries my daughter Renata's name. I put it there so she would feel safe and rooted. That decision turned out to be my first grave error. I pulled up 15 minutes ahead of schedule. My 1992 Chevy pickup truck I tucked around back out of sight so it would not cast a shadow over the evening. I stepped into the kitchen in my best charcoal gray suit, 10 years old, but pressed sharp and spotless. Standing there straightening my tie, I felt like a man who had earned his place in that room. All I wanted was to shake Garrett's hand and mean it. Vivian spotted me first. No embrace, no warmth, just her eyes dropping to my shoes and a frown pulling at the corners of her mouth. She had on a beaded evening gown that cost $3,000, a bill I had cleared off 2 weeks before. She closed the distance between us and seized my tie, yanking it with no gentleness at all. "Clifton, what possessed you to show up in that relic of a suit?" she hissed. "You look like you are dressed for a graveside service, not a gala." I held my smile. "It is my Sunday best, Vivian. Put a shine on those shoes myself." That was when Garrett came through the door. Scotch in one hand, the other, flicking a glance at his expensive watch. Tall man, white with the kind of grin that stays on the surface and never sinks deeper. He looked me over slowly, deliberately, and did not bother to hide what he thought. "We cannot let him circulate among the partners dressed like that," he said to Vivienne, speaking as though I had stepped out of the room. "He looks like he is on staff. Honestly, the catering crew looks sharper." A squeeze gripped my chest. I pressed past it. Stress, I told myself, nothing more. I kept my voice even. "Garrett, I am more than happy to wait in the den. I only came to say congratulations." He laughed. Nothing warm in it, thin and flat as a sheet of ice. "The den is off limits tonight, Clifton. Partners are using it for cigars. Your spot is in here, or better still, that sunroom off the back. If anyone comes through and wonders, tell them you are managing the facilities." Vivian was already nodding before he finished. "Please, Clifton, Renata has spent years building her reputation in these circles. Do not unravel it tonight. Get a plate, keep to the back rooms, and disappear until the real guests are gone." Then they pivoted in unison and swept into the grand hallway to welcome the arrivals. I was left standing alone in the kitchen of a house I bought with my own hands. The catering crew tried not to stare, but the pity on their faces was hard to miss. A young waiter offered me a glass of water. I waved it off. The pressure in my chest was tightening by degrees, like something cinching around my ribs and refusing to loosen. I gripped the granite island to keep myself upright. Through the walls came the sounds of the party blooming, the string quartet opening with Beethoven Crystal, clinking together, Garrett's big voice rolling out a punchline, and the room erupting behind it. I was invisible, a man haunting his own property. I reached for the water pitcher sitting on the counter. My left arm had gone leaden, numb from the shoulder down. My hand would not close around the glass. I stumbled into a stack of serving platters, the antique bone china platters that Vivienne had imported from England. The sound when they hit the tile was like a gunshot. One of the large pieces broke apart into a dozen jagged fragments. The quartet kept playing next door, but the kitchen door flew open before the echo died. Vivienne swept in. Her gaze did not find my face. She did not register the sweat running down my temple. She did not notice my lips going gray. She saw the china on the floor, and that was the only thing in the room. "Are you out of your mind, Clifton?" she screamed. "Do you have any idea what that cost that is, Limoges porcelain? You clumsy old fool." I could not pull in enough air. Both hands were clutching the counter's edge. Vivienne, my chest. She was on her knees collecting shards. Her eyes came up at me cold and bright with fury. "Do not start. Not tonight. Do not stand there pretending to be ill just because I raise my voice at you. We have seen this act before. It is beneath you, and it is pathetic." She rose to her feet, a pointed sliver of china in her fist. "Leave. Go out the back the way you came and drive yourself home. Tonight is already damage enough." I took one step in her direction. Pain detonated through my chest like something structural had given way. My legs folded. I went down hard on the cold tiles, right among the broken pieces. The edges of my vision began to close in. I watched the young waiter fling his tray aside and come at a full run. I saw the phone already in his hand. "Sir, can you hear me?" he shouted. "Somebody call 911. Vivienne did not go to her knees. She smoothed the front of her gown and straightened up. Her expression was one of irritation rather than alarm. "He is perfectly fine," she told the waiter. "He does this. Get the man some water and walk him out to his truck." The waiter paid her no attention. He was already on with the dispatcher. "Male, approximately 70 years old. We are looking at a possible cardiac event. He is losing consciousness." That was when something flickered across Vivienne's face, a crack just for a second. But she never reached down to take my hand. Her attention swung to the door, consumed by the fear that someone from the party might wander in and witness this. "Lower your voice," she hissed at the waiter. "Shut that door." What followed dissolved into fragments strobing, lights' voices arriving from far away. The paramedics came in hard through the service entrance, all business from the first step. Efficient, precise. They split my shirt open and got the pads in place. I was on the gurney before I had time to process it. Being rolled out, I searched the room for Vivienne. She had not moved toward the door. She was planted beside it instead, body angled to shield the view, making sure no guest in the living room caught a glimpse of the scene. "I will call you," she mouthed, but she was already pivoting toward the mirror to smooth her hair back into place. Then, I was inside the ambulance, the siren cutting through everything above me. The medic riding with me was young, steady-eyed, and clearly good at his job. He ran through my vitals without hesitation. "Sir, your pressure is dropping," he said. "We need to reach a family member, someone who can meet us at the hospital." I gave him the only name I had, Renata. He fished my phone from my jacket, brought it up with my Face ID, and called her, speaker on so I could follow every word. 3 rings. She picked up into a wall of noise voices, laughter, celebration. "Hello." Her voice came through loud and sharp. "Who is calling?" "Ma'am, this is the Mecklenburg County Paramedic Service." The medic's voice was measured, deliberate. "Your father Clifton is with us. He has had a massive heart attack, and we are transporting him to Carolina's medical center. This is critical. You need to come immediately." Silence for a beat. Then I heard Garrett somewhere behind her, asking who was on the line. "Oh, God." Renata's tone went flat. "Is he doing that thing again where he clutches his chest? Mom told me he broke a plate. She got upset. He is embarrassed, that is all. He is fine." "Ma'am," the medic did not soften. "His vitals are not stable. I am not calling as a precaution. He may not make it." In the background, a spoon rang against crystal. The speeches were starting. "We are literally in the middle of the toast right now," Renata said. "Garrett is cutting the cake in about 5 minutes. We cannot just walk out. It would derail the whole evening. Give him oxygen, let him rest, and we will come by in the morning." "Ma'am, please." the medic tried. I said, "Stop calling this number." Renata's voice went cold and clipped. "If he is genuinely ill, the insurance card is in his wallet. Use it. We are not responsible for the bill." She ended the call. The inside of that ambulance went quiet, nothing but the monotone rhythm of the heart monitor filling the space between us. The medic sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. When he looked at me, the professional composure had slipped just enough to show what was underneath it. "I am so sorry, sir," he said quietly. I lay there staring up at the ribbed metal ceiling above me, and I had nothing left to say. The pain in my chest was still there, but it had changed its nature. The crushing weight had lifted. In its place was something cold and hollow. 40 years I had poured into those people. Double shifts in the pouring rain. I skipped my own birthday dinners to patch their leaking roofs. I bankrolled college tuitions I never collected. I paid for weddings where they sat me near the back. I paid for the very cake they were slicing right now, while I bled out in the back of an ambulance. A single tear tracked down the side of my face and disappeared into the pillow. It was the last one I would ever waste on them. The monitor picked up its pace. My vision dimmed at the edges. I found the medic's face. "Do not call them back," I told him. My voice came out raw but certain. "Sir, we are required to notify next of kin." "No," I said. "I have no family left. Not anymore." I let my eyes close. The dark moved in and took me. I did not know whether I would surface again, but I was certain of one thing. If I did, Clifton the provider, the man who carried everyone, was finished. Whoever opened his eyes next morning would be a stranger to them. A stranger who was done picking up the tab. The only sound in the room was the cardiac monitor ticking off the seconds of a life my family had not bothered to come and defend. I opened my eyes. The light was low. The room smelled of antiseptic and clean floors. My arm resisted when I tried to lift it. My throat felt raw, like something had been dragged through it. I turned my head left. The visitor chair sat empty. I turned right. The bedside table held nothing. No flowers, no cards. Not even a half-finished cup of coffee to hint that somebody had been present and stepped away. My eyes found the digital clock above the door. 3 days since the surgery. 72 hours. The quiet in that room pressed down on my chest harder than the surgical scar. My mind drifted back to 1994. Renata was 12, doubled over with appendicitis. I spent 4 nights folded into a plastic chair beside her. My back was in agony, but every time she woke up sobbing, I made sure my hand was there. I thought about Darnell snapping his leg at football practice and the 6 weeks I carried him up and down every flight of stairs. I thought about sitting with Vivienne through her hysterectomy, mopping her forehead, feeding her ice chips, telling her she was beautiful on the days she felt anything but. I was always the one who showed up. I was the foundation. I was what held everything upright. Now the foundation had cracked, and they had all simply walked away from the rubble. A nurse came in, a broad-shouldered woman with a face that still held some warmth. She checked my IV line, scanned the empty room, then looked at me. The gentleness in her expression stung worse than an insult would have. "Mr. Clifton," she said quietly, "it is good to have you back with us. You gave everybody here quite a scare." My voice came out like a door with a rusty hinge. "Did anyone come?" She paused. She picked up the chart from the foot of the bed. She straightened my blanket. She was buying herself a moment before she had to answer. "Your wife phoned the first evening to handle the billing," she said at last. "She wanted to know whether the insurance covered a private room. When we confirmed it did, she ended the call." I shut my eyes. Not a word about whether I was breathing, only the money. "Is there anything I can bring you?" the nurse asked. "My phone," I said. She pulled it from the bedside drawer and set it in my palm. It felt cold. I waited until she left before I looked at the screen. No missed calls, no messages. Just a weather alert telling me it was sunny in Charlotte. My thumb drifted toward the contacts, then stopped. Instead, I opened an app buried inside a folder I had labeled Utilities. It was the dashboard for the security cameras I had put in at Ridgecrest Manor 3 months earlier. I had never mentioned them. To those people, I was a feeble old man who wrestled with the television remote. They had no idea I understood technology better than any of them understood honest labor. The feed came up sharp and clean in high definition. I switched to the living room camera. What I saw turned the blood cold in my chest. Every single one of them was there. On a Tuesday afternoon, they should have been at their desks. They should have been at this hospital. Instead, they were draped across my furniture working through my wine cellar. I pressed the volume up. Their voices bled into that silent room and filled it. "Honestly, I feel relieved," Garrett was saying. He was sprawled across the leather sofa, feet planted on the coffee table, wrapped in one of my own silk robes. "The house feels different without him shuffling through the halls and grumbling every time someone left a light burning." Vivienne was settled into her armchair, a glass of Pinot Grigio in hand. Her face was loose, unbothered, more at ease than I had seen her in years. "Do not be cruel, Garrett," she said, though there was nothing behind the words. "He is just a difficult man. He has always been that way. But yes, I do feel like I can finally breathe inside my own home." "Your home," Garrett said, arching an eyebrow. "It is Renata's name on the deed, but it is your house, Mom. And once he is gone for good, it will belong to you completely." I zoomed the frame tighter. Renata was cross-legged on the floor with stacks of bills spread around her, the emergency cash from the safe in my study. They had broken into my safe. "So, what exactly is the plan?" Renata asked, thumbing through the notes. "The doctor is saying he may pull through. If he comes back here, it is going to be a disaster. He will need round-the-clock care. He will need help just getting across a room. I have a whole life, Garrett. I have yoga, I have brunch. I am not becoming a caretaker for an old man who despises me." Garrett reached over and lifted his wine glass, my wine. "I have already been looking into it. There is a place called Briarwood Gardens out past the edge of the city. State-funded, nothing glamorous, but functional." Vivian looked up. "Is it clean at least?" "Does that really matter?" Garrett said, and he laughed. "He will not know either way. We tell him it is a high-end rehabilitation retreat. By the time it dawns on him that it is a warehouse for the destitute, he will be too deep in medication to raise a fuss. We put his pension checks toward the room with a window upgrade. Whatever remains, we keep here where it should be." Vivian took a slow pull from her glass. She let her gaze travel the room, the ceilings, the art on the walls, every beautiful thing I had given her across 4 decades. "I suppose it makes the most sense," she said. "I have devoted 40 years to that man. I have earned the right to enjoy what is left of my life without carrying that weight. A burden." The word settled over me like a stone. The woman I had loved since I was 20 years old. The man I had welcomed like a son. The daughter I had spoiled like royalty, now sitting on my study floor, counting cash she had no right to touch. I watched them another minute. They were already laughing about a trip to Cabo, spending what they assumed they would pocket. They were dividing up my watch collection like auction lots. They were rubbing me out before I was even cold. I closed the app. My hand trembled not from frailty, from a white-cold rage that had burned through every last trace of grief. They wanted the money. They wanted the house and the freedom that came with it. They were going to get exactly what that choice deserved. I scrolled through my contacts until one name stopped me. Elwood answered before the first ring had finished. "Clifton?" His voice broke immediately. "Thank God. I have been trying to reach that hospital for 3 days, and they would not say a word. Non-family members, they kept telling me. I drove out to the house, and Garrett met me at the door and said you did not want visitors. I knew that was a lie the moment he said it. I was 20 minutes from driving back out there and walking through that door myself. "How are you, my friend?" I drew a breath. The pain in my chest pushed back, but I pushed harder. I sat up in that bed, squared my shoulders, and let the old voice come, the one I kept for dishonest contractors and broken agreements. "I am done, Elwood," I said. Quiet, flat, absolutely certain. "Done with what?" Elwood asked. "Elwood, they are planning to put me in a facility. They are burning through my money as we speak. They have helped themselves to my wardrobe. They think I am lying there incapacitated. They think I am already finished." Silence on the other end. Then Elwood spoke, and his voice had gone somewhere very dark. "Just tell me what you need." I stared at the vacant chair beside the bed. I stared at the gray walls. I stared at the future that was standing in front of me if I let this moment pass. "Bring the documents," I said. "Bring the laptop and bring the car. I am walking out of this hospital tonight." "Tonight," Elwood said. "Clifton, you just came off the operating table." "I do not care," I told him. "If I stay here, I am finished. If I go back to them, I am finished. I need to be reborn, Elwood." I let a breath out slowly, watching dust particles drift through the stripe of light coming from the window. "Execute Operation Omega." I heard him pull a sharp breath in. We had talked about Operation Omega years back, and we had laughed about it when we did. It was the scorched earth protocol, the nuclear option, the blueprint for liquidating everything and disappearing without a trace. It was never meant to leave the realm of hypothetical. "Are you certain, Clifton?" Elwood asked, his voice dropping low. "Because once this train leaves the station, there is no pulling it back. You will burn all of it down, the house, the trust, the reputation. You will leave them standing in the wreckage with nothing but what they are wearing." I turned the phone over in my hand. I thought about Vivian's face when the word burden came out of her mouth like it cost her nothing. I thought about Garrett laughing into my wine glass. "I am not burning anything down, Elwood," I said. "I am just cutting the power. They have been living in my light for far too long. It is time they learned what the dark feels like. Do it." I ended the call. I lay back and let the pillow take my head. The room was as empty as it had been all week, but something had shifted. I was no longer just a patient in a bed. I had a plan. I had direction. My heart was damaged, no question about that. But it was still going. And for the first time in 40 years, every beat belonged to me alone. I knew precisely when they would show up. Knew it because I had been covering the insurance premiums for 20 years without complaint. And I knew the hospital's policy after 7 days as an inpatient updated paperwork required a family signature. If they failed to appear, the discharge defaulted to a state facility. That was a risk they could not afford to let happen. If I landed in a state facility, auditors would start pulling at the threads. They would find the transfers. They would start asking the kind of questions that Garrett and Renata had no clean answers to. So they had to show their faces. They had to run the performance of the devoted family one final time in order to keep what they thought they were about to inherit. They came down the corridor at Carolina's Medical Center at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was not in that building to watch them arrive, but I did not need to be. I knew those people down to their marrow. Vivian would have had her oversized sunglasses on, not because grief had swollen her eyes, but because she had nothing to hide and no reason to pretend otherwise. She would have worn black, not as any gesture of mourning, but because she believed it flattered her figure. Garrett would be gripping his leather briefcase. Inside it, a power of attorney, his corporate lawyers had prepared a document designed to strip me of every right I held and hand him dominion over my bank accounts, my properties, and every investment I had ever made. They walked toward that room, the way scavengers approach something that stopped moving. At the nurse's station, they paused. I can picture the production Renata would have staged there, a slight tremor in the voice. Questions about how her poor father was holding up a few words about how devastating the week had been, how she had wanted to be there sooner, but life had been so relentless. The nurses would have absorbed it all with polished neutrality. They have seen both kinds of families, the ones who sleep upright in chairs for days, and the ones who materialize only when financial arrangements need to be made. They directed my family to room 304. Garrett went first. He pressed through the heavy door, prepared to find a diminished old man tangled in monitoring wires, ready to guide a pen into trembling fingers and walk away with everything I had built. He stepped into the room and stopped moving entirely. Vivienne walked into his back. Renata craned around his shoulder. The room was absolutely still. The equipment was switched off. The monitors were dark. But the loudest thing in that room was not the silence. It was the bed, empty. Sheets pulled away, mattress, exposed not so much as an indent in the surface. No Clifton, no patient. Nothing but the smell of cleaning solution and pale winter light pressing through the blinds. "Where is he?" Vivian demanded. Every trace of the composed, sympathetic widow act evaporated in an instant. She turned toward the hallway. "Nurse, where is my husband?" A nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Clifton was discharged earlier this morning, ma'am. He left against medical advice, but he was assessed as mentally competent to make that call. He arranged his own private transport." "Discharged!" Garrett exploded. His briefcase hit the rolling table hard. "That is not possible. The man can barely stand upright. Who cleared this?" "He cleared it himself," the nurse said, unbothered by the volume. "He is an adult, Mr. Caldwell. This is not a facility that holds people against their will." Renata yanked the closet door open. "Empty. My old suit gone, my shoes gone, my wallet gone." "He took everything," Renata said. Her voice climbed with each word. "Mom, he took every single thing." Vivienne shook her head, pressing her fingers to her temple. "He cannot have gotten far. He has no one to go to. We made sure of that years ago. We cut him off from everyone. He is probably sitting downstairs in the lobby right now, waiting for someone to collect him. He is just making a scene. This is all theater." Garrett moved to the far side of the bed and looked down at the pillow. Something was there, the only object remaining in the entire room. A single sheet of white notepad paper folded in half. Resting on top of it, a black USB drive. He picked up the note. He recognized the handwriting before he had unfolded it. Those same block capital letters he had watched sign checks for his car payments. His country club dues his entire comfortable life. He opened it. Vivienne and Renata pressed close on either side. They were braced for a suicide note. They were ready for pleading for guilt, for a broken old man begging to be taken back. What they found was what I had written 4 hours earlier from a wheelchair by that window. It was short. To my family. You chose the party. You chose the cake. You chose the champagne. I hope every bite was worth it, because that was the last meal I will ever pay for. I did not die on that table, but the Clifton you knew is gone. Do not search for me. Do not call this number. As far as any of you are concerned, I am already a ghost. Garrett's laugh came out short and sharp. He dropped the paper onto the mattress like it offended him. Unbelievable, he said. He is throwing a tantrum, a 68-year-old man staging a runaway act. He is frightening me, Garrett, Renata said. She could not stop looking at the empty closet. What does he mean last meal? Who pays the mortgage at the end of the month? Who covers the credit cards? Relax, Garrett said. He was already turning the USB drive over in his fingers, studying it. He is bluffing. He left this drive, you know how he operates. He has probably recorded himself delivering a 40-minute lecture about gratitude and fiscal responsibility. Maybe he digitized his budget spreadsheet. He wants us to chase him. He wants us to come crawling. He held the drive up where the light caught the metal casing. Actually, Garrett said, the smile stretching wide across his face, the kind that never softened into anything genuine. This is better than I thought. If he is gone, he cannot interfere with anything. I watched him plugging this drive in last month when he was doing his taxes. I would bet everything it has the login credentials for his investment accounts on it. If that is the case, we do not need his signature on anything. We move the funds ourselves. We say he authorized the transfers before he went senile and wandered off. Vivienne lowered herself into the visitor chair and fanned the air in front of her face. Thank goodness. I genuinely thought he meant it for a moment. Just handle the accounts, Garrett. I need to schedule something at the spa. This kind of tension is not good for me. Garrett perched on the edge of the bare mattress, snapped open his briefcase, and lifted out the sleek laptop I had given him the previous Christmas. He powered it up. The screen cast a pale blue glow into the dim room. He slid the USB drive into the side port. Watch this, he said. Father-in-law is about to make us all very wealthy. He waited for the file browser to populate. He waited for the spreadsheet, the account numbers, the routing codes, but the folder did not open. Instead, a black window materialized on the screen. Red text began racing down the display in rapid columns. No file directory, no spreadsheet. Just a command script running on its own. What is that? Renata asked, leaning in close. I have no idea, Garrett said. A crease formed between his brows. He jabbed the escape key. He jabbed the enter key. The screen ignored him. The scrolling stopped. A single message pulsed in the center of the display, bold and unblinking. Access denied. Protocol Omega initiated. Omega? Vivienne asked. What is Omega? Before Garrett could put a sentence together, a sound ripped through the room, a sharp mechanical buzz from his jacket pocket. He fished out his phone. American Express notification. Transaction declined. Recurring payment to Porsche Financial Services failed. Card suspended by primary account holder. What the, Garrett said under his breath. Then Renata's phone went off. She pulled it from her purse and the color left her face completely. Mom, she said, her voice barely holding. The bank just flagged me. The joint checking account. She swallowed. The balance is at zero. Zero. Vivienne's voice cracked. There was $50,000 sitting in that account yesterday. It is gone, Renata said. The alert says transfer initiated by CH Trust. Mom, that is Dad's trust. Garrett's phone erupted again, then a third time, a rapid, furious sequence like a swarm in his palm. Visa Black Card deactivated. MasterCard Gold deactivated. Corporate expense account, frozen pending audit. Garrett was already hammering at the keyboard. He punched his username into the banking portal. He punched in his password. Login failed. User account locked for suspicious activity. Please contact the administrator. He is locking us out. Garrett's fist came down on the laptop. The old man is cutting us off from everything. Fix it, Garrett. Vivienne was on her feet, whatever composure she had managed to maintain now fully stripped away. Fix it this instant. I have a hair appointment at noon. I cannot fix it, Garrett shouted back. He is the primary account holder. We have always been authorized users, nothing more. If he pulls the plug, that is it. We sit in the dark. Renata broke into sobs. But the house, the mortgage is due on the 1st. If everything is frozen, how do we cover it? Garrett stared at the screen, where access denied continued to blink at him like a taunt. He looked at the bare mattress. He looked at the note he had crumpled aside like a joke 5 minutes ago. He is not bluffing, Garrett whispered. The arrogance had drained clean out of his expression, leaving something pale and cold behind. He did not just disappear. He took a chainsaw to the power lines on the way out. Vivienne grabbed her phone and dialed my number. She put it on speaker. They all stood there listening, 1 ring, 2, 3. Then it clicked over to voicemail. But it was not my voice. It was not the halting message I had recorded years ago asking people to leave their name and number. It was an automated operator, flat and mechanical. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Goodbye. The line dropped. Silence settled back over room 304. But this was a different kind of silence than the one they had walked into. That first silence had been the quiet of an empty room. This was something heavier, something sealed. They stood there in their polished shoes and tailored grief clothes, staring at their useless phones, finally confronting a truth they had never had reason to consider before the money did not come from thin air. It came from the roughened hands of the man they had left to die on a gurney, and those hands were no longer open. The drive back to Ridgecrest Manor was wordless and airless. The climate control in Garrett's luxury sedan worked fine, but the moisture on his forehead had nothing to do with temperature. It was pure dread tightening its grip 1 mile at a time. Vivienne kept her face turned toward the window, the whole way refusing to acknowledge the empty back seat where she had assumed I would be riding. Renata sat gnawing at her thumbnail, a nervous tic she had not indulged since she was a child. They needed the estate around them. They needed the security gate and the high walls to restore the feeling that they still held some power. They needed to convince themselves that what had happened in that hospital room was a glitch, a clerical error, a bad few hours that would resolve itself the moment they crossed their own threshold. Garrett swung the car into the driveway and reached for the garage remote on the visor. He pressed it. Nothing. He pressed it again with more conviction. The heavy double doors did not move. For the love of... Garrett muttered, slapping the wheel. Power must be out or the battery is dead. Everything in this world is falling apart today. He parked at the main entrance. They climbed out. The North Carolina sun sat high and punishing, pouring down on all that black fabric. Renata went up the stone steps first, heading for the massive front doors. She pressed her thumb to the biometric panel top-of-the-line hardware, installed to flash green and click open in under a second. Instead, the indicator light blazed red. A sharp, dismissive beep rang out across the quiet afternoon. "Try it again," Vivienne said, fanning herself with her purse. "You are rushing it, Renata." Renata dried her thumb on her hem and pressed again. Beep. Red. "Stand aside," Garrett said, shouldering past. "You are not doing it right." He punched the 6-digit backup code into the keypad. 198500. His birthday? He hit enter. Beep, red light, system lockout active. Something cold moved through the hot afternoon air. They looked at one another. The irritation on their faces was curdling into something raw and harder to name. This was not a dead battery. This was not a glitch. This was a deliberate communication. "What is happening?" Vivienne whispered. Her voice had lost its edge entirely. "Why can we not get into my house?" Before Garrett could respond, a black SUV rolled up behind their car and blocked it in. Hard behind it came a large white box truck that stopped squarely at the edge of the lawn. 2 men in work uniforms dropped out of the truck. A man in a trim gray suit stepped out of the SUV. He carried a clipboard, and his bearing made it clear this was not a courtesy call. Garrett came down the steps trying to reassemble his authority. "Who are you?" he said, aiming a finger at the suited man. "You are blocking my driveway. Move that truck right now, or I pick up the phone and call the police." The man adjusted his glasses without hurry. He looked at Garrett with the flat patience of someone who handled irate, overextended people for a living. Mr. Garrett Caldwell and Mrs. Renata Hargrove, he asked. Yes, Garrett snapped. And you are? My name is Mr. Whitmore. I represent the CH Trust. I am here to carry out the immediate termination of your lease agreement. Renata let out a laugh, short, brittle, edged with panic. Lease agreement? That is absurd. We own this property. My name is on the deed. My father purchased it for us. Mr. Whitmore turned a page on his clipboard and produced a document bearing the official county seal. A small correction. Mrs. Hargrove, your name does appear on the deed for the physical structure that is accurate. However, the 5 acres of land underneath that, its structure, the gardens, the driveway on which you are currently standing, all of that belongs to the CH Trust. Under the ground lease contract executed 5 years ago, the house is permitted to occupy that land solely for as long as the lease remains valid. He held the document out to Garrett. Please direct your attention to Clause 14, Section B, the filial piety clause. Garrett snatched the paper. His eyes moved fast and unsteady across the legal language. His lips moved with the words as he read. The lease is granted on the condition that the grantee Renata Hargrove provides adequate physical and emotional care for the grantor Clifton Hargrove. Any evidence of neglect, abuse, or abandonment renders the lease null and void immediately, upon which the grantor reserves the right to reclaim the land and evict all occupants within 1 hour. Garrett raised his face from the page. It was the color of ash. Abandonment. We did not abandon him. We visited him. 7 days later. Mr. Whitmore said with no warmth at all, after leaving him alone in a critical condition to attend a social function. The trust holds the hospital logs, the paramedic report, and surveillance footage from the ambulance. The violation is unambiguous. The lease is terminated. Vivian stepped forward. She reached for the old tool, the warmth and the softness that had worked on me across 4 decades. Sir, I am sure there is a misunderstanding somewhere in all of this. Clifton would never do this to us. He loves this house. He created this life for his family. I watched them from the deep quiet of my own memory. And Vivian was right about one thing. I did love that land. I purchased those 5 acres 30 years ago when it was nothing but red clay and scrub pine. I was a young man then with a strong back and everything still ahead of me. I worked 2 jobs to scrape together the down payment, pouring concrete through the day, driving a taxi through the night. I cleared that land myself. I dug the first foundation by hand for the modest house we lived in long before the mansion existed. I planted the walnut tree that shaded the driveway. Every foot of that ground holds my sweat. I did it so my children would have grass beneath their feet. I did it so my wife could tend a garden. But as the years passed, they stopped seeing the land for what it was. They only saw the status it carried. They did not care about the walnut tree that shaded the driveway. They only cared about the gate that kept the less fortunate out. They forgot that the land listens and the land remembers who honored it. Mr. Whitmore checked his watch. You have 50 minutes remaining to vacate the premises. Vacate. Renata screamed. We live here. All our belongings are inside. Mr. Whitmore nodded toward the man waiting by the truck. That is why I brought the team. Anything you cannot carry to your vehicle in the next hour will be removed and set out on the public curb. Once it touches the curb, it becomes abandoned property. No, Garrett shouted. You cannot do this. I know the law. You are required to give us 30 days' notice. This has to follow legal eviction procedure. Mr. Whitmore smiled thin and sharp. Actually, Mr. Caldwell, since you pay no rent and hold no title to this land, you are classified as guests at will. Guests do not receive 30 days. Guests get shown the door when they have overstayed their welcome, and you have overstayed yours by roughly 20 years. He signaled the movers. The 2 men marched up the front steps. They carried a master key card. The red light on the door turned green for them. The door that had been locked against my family swung wide open for strangers. Stop them! Vivian shrieked, seizing Garrett's arm. Do something, Garrett! You are a finance man. Stop them. Garrett stood frozen in place. He was holding the paperwork that confirmed he was nothing more than a squatter dressed in an expensive suit. He watched helplessly as the movers disappeared into his home. The next 40 minutes dissolved into a blur of chaos and humiliation. The movers brought no boxes. They brought no bubble wrap. They worked with a brutal mechanical efficiency. They walked out carrying armfuls of designer clothing. They hauled out Garrett's golf clubs. They carried out Renita's yoga mats and her collection of costly vases. Hey, be careful with that, Renata yelled, chasing after a mover who had her limited edition handbags tucked under his arm. Those are Hermes. Do not drop them. The mover did not break stride. He walked to the edge of the driveway where the manicured lawn met the asphalt. He dropped the bags onto the grass. The grass was soaked from the automatic sprinklers that had just kicked on. "My bags!" Renata wailed, lunging onto the wet lawn, desperately trying to salvage her leather goods. Then came the personal items. They left the heavy sofas and the grand piano where they stood. They brought out only what belonged to the people, the portraits the family had loved so much, the awards Garrett had purchased for himself, the jewelry boxes. Vivian stood beside the car, one hand pressed against her chest. She had the look of a queen watching her kingdom reduced to rubble. She saw a mover come through the door with her collection of vintage hats. He tossed them carelessly onto a pile of shoes near the muddy gutter. "Clifton!" she screamed. She spun around wildly as if I might emerge from behind a tree and bring the madness to a halt. "Clifton, stop this. I am sorry about the plate. I am sorry about the party. Just come back." But there was no answer, only the hiss of the sprinklers and the dull thud of expensive things striking the ground. Mr. Whitmore walked over to Garrett. "Time is up. Please move your vehicle out of the driveway. The gate will be locked in 2 minutes." "But we cannot fit all of this in the car." Garrett stammered, gesturing at the mountain of possessions strewn across the lawn. "That is not my concern," Mr. Whitmore said. "I suggest you take what truly matters." Garrett stared at the pile. He grabbed his golf clubs. He grabbed his laptop bag. He did not grab the photo album from his wedding. He did not grab the box holding Darnell's childhood trophies. He grabbed what he could sell. Renata was cramming clothing into the trunk, crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Get in the car, Renata!" Garrett yelled. "We have to go." They scrambled into the sedan like rats abandoning a sinking ship. The car was jammed with clothes and shoes. Vivian sat rigid in the front seat, clutching a jewelry box, eyes fixed straight ahead. Her makeup had run down her face in dark streaks. Garrett reversed out of the driveway. The tires screamed against the asphalt. He backed out onto the public road. Mr. Whitmore stood at the gate. He pressed a button on his remote. The heavy iron gates began their slow swing shut. Through the rear window, they watched the house recede from view. They watched the soaked pile of their remaining belongings sitting forlorn on the grass. They watched the sanctuary they had taken for granted lock them out for good. Vivian let out a long, low wail. It was the sound of a woman who had finally grasped the true meaning of loss. She reached for her phone to call me again, but somewhere deep down she already knew the line would be dead. The house was gone, the money was gone, and the man she had dismissed as a burden was the only one who still held the keys. Garrett Caldwell walked into the lobby of the Drummond Financial Tower at 9 in the morning. He did not carry himself with his usual swagger. He did not high-five the doorman. He did not wink at the receptionist. He walked with his head angled down, hoping no one would notice he had on the same suit from the day before. It was wrinkled. A small coffee stain marked the lapel, the result of a cheap motel cup he had gulped down in the car. He smelled of stale sweat and quiet desperation. He had spent the night at a budget lodge off the highway because his credit cards were frozen and he had only $40 in cash left in his wallet. He approached the security turnstile. He produced his platinum employee badge. He tapped it against the scanner. Access denied. He tapped it again harder this time. Access denied. The security guard looked up. It was old Mr. Coburn, a man Garrett had ignored for 5 years. "Mr. Caldwell," the guard said slowly, "the scanner is not broken. You need to go to the front desk. They have a temporary pass for you." Garrett cursed under his breath. He snatched the paper pass from the receptionist and pushed toward the elevators. He could feel the eyes of the junior analysts tracking him. Usually they watched him with envy. Today they watched him with something far worse. They watched him with morbid curiosity, the way people slow down to look at a wreck on the road. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like it stretched on for a lifetime. Garrett checked his phone. He had missed 20 calls from his partners. There were 10 urgent voicemails waiting from the compliance department. He told himself it was all just a misunderstanding. He told himself he could charm his way through it. He was Garrett Caldwell. He was the firm's golden boy. He was the rainmaker. He stepped out onto the trading floor. It was pandemonium. On any normal day, the floor hummed with controlled energy. Today, it was a riot. Phones were ringing without stop. Traders were shouting across each other. Red numbers strobed across the giant LED screens lining the walls. Garrett looked at the ticker for his specific fund, the Caldwell Growth Fund. It was down. Not just off a few points. It was in freefall. It had shed 80% of its value in under 3 hours. He ran to his office. His assistant Nadine was packing a box. She was crying. "Nadine." "What is happening?" Garrett shouted. "Why is every board flashing red? Who is selling?" Nadine looked at him. She did not call him sir. She did not offer him coffee. "Everyone is selling Garrett," she said, because the anchor investor pulled out. "The liquidity is gone. The fund is insolvent." Garrett went still. Anchor investor. That was impossible. His anchor investor was an anonymous entity known only as the Angel. The Angel had backed Garrett when he was still a junior broker. The Angel had poured millions into his portfolio, making Garrett look like a genius. The Angel never asked questions. The Angel just signed checks. "Get me the chairman," Garrett yelled. "Get me the board. I need to explain." "You do not need to call anyone," Nadine said, lifting her box. "They are already waiting for you in conference room A. And Garrett, good luck. You are going to need it." Garrett straightened his tie. He tried to press down the creases in his jacket. He drew a long breath. He told himself he could still fix this. He just needed to speak with the Angel. He just needed to ask for one more chance. He walked into conference room A. The room was cold. The long mahogany table was occupied by the 5 senior partners of the firm. At the head sat the chairman, Mr. Drummond, a man of few words and even fewer mercies. "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Mr. Drummond said. He did not gesture toward a chair. Garrett remained standing. He forced a smile. "Gentlemen, I understand how this looks, but it is nothing more than a market correction. My primary investor, the Angel, is simply rebalancing his holdings. I can reach him directly. We have a very particular relationship." Mr. Drummond slid a thick file across the table. It came to rest right at the edge in front of Garrett. "Open it," Mr. Drummond said. Garrett opened the file. The first page was a withdrawal notice. It was dated the previous evening. The amount withdrawn was $50 million. "Look at the signature, Mr. Caldwell," Mr. Drummond said. "Look at the name of your Angel." Garrett looked at the bottom of the page. He expected to find a corporate shell entity from the Cayman Islands. He expected a foreign bank. What he found instead was a signature written in blue ink, a signature he had seen on birthday cards and permission slips for 30 years. Clifton Hargrove, trustee of the CH Trust. The room tilted. Garrett gripped the edge of the table. "No," he whispered. "This has to be a mistake. My father-in-law is a construction worker. He is a nobody. He drives a truck. He does not have $50 million. Mr. Drummond laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound with no warmth in it. "You arrogant fool. Clifton Hargrove is not a nobody. He owns half the commercial real estate in downtown Charlotte. He owns the land this very building sits on. He has been quietly backing your career for 10 years because he wanted to support his daughter. He built the Angel entity solely to give you a foundation. He believed you had potential." Mr. Drummond rose and walked to the window, looking out over the city below. "He called me last night, Mr. Caldwell. He told me everything. He told me how you treated him. He told me about the party. He told me about the hospital. He told me that he was done funding a man who could not extend him the smallest measure of basic decency." Garrett felt nausea climb the back of his throat. Every bonus he had ever collected, every promotion, every award, it was all hollow. He had not earned a single thing. Every bit of it had been handed to him by the man he had written off as a burden. The man he had tried to warehouse in a state facility was the sole reason he still had a career. "So, the money is gone," Garrett stammered. "The money is gone," Mr. Drummond said, turning back from the window to face him. "And so is your reputation. You are not a financial genius, Mr. Caldwell. You are a charity case, and that charity has now been cut off." "I can fix this," Garrett pleaded. "I can bring in new investors. I have connections." "You have no one," Mr. Drummond snapped. "You are toxic. The fund has collapsed. We are staring down lawsuits from the minority investors. You have cost this firm millions in a single morning." Mr. Drummond pressed a button on the intercom. "Security, please come to conference room A." Garrett stepped back. "No, you cannot fire me. I am a partner. I have equity." "Your equity is worth 0, Mr. Drummond said. "And you are being terminated for cause gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and, frankly, for being a man of deeply low moral character. Two large security guards stepped into the room. They were not the congenial old Mr. Coburn from the lobby. These were the enforcement team. "Escort Mr. Caldwell out of the building," Mr. Drummond ordered. "He is not to return to his office." "Wait," Garrett said. "My laptop, my contacts." "Property of the firm," Mr. Drummond said. "My car," Garrett said. "My company car it is in the garage." "Property of the firm," Mr. Drummond said. "The keys, Mr. Caldwell. Hand them to the guard." Garrett reached into his pocket. His hand trembled as he drew out the key fob to the Mercedes he had cherished more than his own wife. He set it down on the mahogany table. "Phone too," Mr. Drummond added. Garrett surrendered the latest iPhone. "Now get out," Mr. Drummond said, turning his back. "You disgust me." The guards took hold of Garrett by both arms. They did not drag him, but their grip left no room for argument. They marched him out of the conference room. They marched him past the glass walls of the trading floor. Hundreds of heads swiveled. The people who had once looked up to him now watched him being walked out like a man under arrest. He spotted Nadine watching from across the floor. She did not look sorrowful anymore. She looked indifferent. She was already working on a new resume. They took him down in the elevator. They walked him through the lobby. They did not allow him a stop at the restroom. They guided him straight toward the revolving doors. One guard pushed the door open. Garrett stumbled out onto the hot pavement of Trade Street. The other guard tossed a small cardboard box at his feet. It held a framed photograph of his wife and a stapler. "If you set foot back on the premises, you will be arrested for trespassing," the guard said. The doors locked behind him. Garrett stood alone on the sidewalk. He was wearing a wrinkled suit. He had no phone. He had no car. He had no job. He had no money. People on the street flowed around him. A businessman clipped his shoulder and muttered something unpleasant. A taxi laid on its horn. Garrett looked up at the gleaming glass tower. He looked at the 41st floor where he had once considered himself a king. He understood with a sick, hollow drop in his stomach that he had never been a king at all. He had been a jester, performing for a king he had been too blind to recognize. He looked down at the photo of Renata lying in the box. He wondered whether she would still love him, now that he was simply Garrett, just a man standing on a public street. He wondered how he was going to get back to the motel without a car. He started walking. He had no clear destination. He only knew that, for the first time in his life, he was moving forward on his own 2 feet. And the road stretching out ahead of him was very long and very hard. While Garrett stood on that sidewalk with his box of shame, my son Darnell was driving on Interstate 77, living in a world of his own making. At 28 years old, Darnell had never held a job for more than 3 months at a stretch. He called himself an entrepreneur, but his only real business model was coming to me for money. He drove a bright orange sports car that had cost more than my first house. It was a car I had leased for him under my own name because his credit score was lower than his age. I did it because Vivienne begged me. She said the car would give him confidence going into job interviews. Instead, it gave him something to flee his responsibilities in. That Tuesday afternoon, he was racing. I know this because a notification came through on my phone from the vehicle tracking system. He was doing 110 miles per hour, threading through traffic like a reckless fool. He had 2 friends in the car with him. I knew who they were. They were leeches who stayed close to Darnell, only because he covered the drinks and the gas. I could picture the scene inside that car. The music would be deafening. Darnell would be shouting over the bass, boasting about how his family owned half of Charlotte. He would be telling them this car was just a toy, and that he planned to buy a yacht the following month. I sat in my quiet rental cabin far away and opened the leasing app on my tablet. I watched the little orange dot burning across the map. I watched the speed gauge climb 115, 120. He was reckless. He gave no thought to the families in the minivans he was cutting off. He had no regard for the law. He believed he was untouchable because he was a Hargrove. It was time to remind him that gravity is no respecter of last names. I navigated to the remote control menu. There was a button labeled Immobilization Protocol. It existed for situations where the car was stolen. In a manner of speaking, the car had been stolen. Stolen by an ungrateful child who had come to treat love as a transaction. I pressed the button. Confirm. Out on the highway, the result was immediate. The roar of the V8 engine went silent. The power steering locked up. The digital dashboard went dark. The air conditioning died. Darnell must have panicked. The car began to coast bleeding speed rapidly. He would have been hammering the gas pedal bewildered and furious. He would have been cursing at the machine. He managed to wrestle the heavy wheel and steer the dead car onto the emergency shoulder. It rolled to a standstill on the gravel just past the exit for downtown. I watched the dot on my screen go still. I took a sip of my tea. The first phase was complete. Now I settled in to wait for the second. Darnell sat in the stifling heat of the car. He jabbed at the start button over and over. Nothing, not even a click. His friends were probably laughing at him by now. The self-declared king of the road sat looking like a fool in a broken-down toy. He did not call a tow truck. He did not call a mechanic. He did precisely what I knew he would do. He climbed out of the car and started kicking the tires. He screamed at the traffic thundering past. He was a child throwing a tantrum on the shoulder of the interstate. 10 minutes later, the blue lights appeared. A North Carolina State Patrol cruiser rolled up behind the stalled orange car. The officer stepped out, a seasoned trooper with a flat-brimmed hat and absolutely no patience for nonsense. Darnell did not greet the man with any courtesy. He did not apologize for being stopped on a busy highway. He leaned back against the car with his arms folded. "Officer, this car is a piece of junk," Darnell announced. "You need to call a flatbed for me and make it fast. I have a VIP reservation at the club in an hour." The officer walked closer. He looked at the car. He looked at Darnell's flashy outfit. "License and registration," the officer said, his voice even. Darnell rolled his eyes. He reached into the glove compartment. He produced a crumpled envelope. He passed it to the officer along with his license. "Do you know who my father is?" Darnell asked. "My father is Clifton Hargrove. He knows the mayor. If you write me a ticket for breaking down, you will be directing traffic at a middle school by tomorrow." The officer did not flinch. He carried the documents back to his cruiser. He ran the information through his computer. I had prepared for this moment. 3 days earlier, while I was still flat in a hospital bed, I had canceled the automatic renewal on the car registration. The day before, I had called the insurance company and removed Darnell from the policy. The officer came back to where Darnell was standing. His hand rested on his belt. "Mr. Hargrove," the officer said, "step away from the vehicle." "What?" Darnell snapped. "Just call the tow truck." "Step away from the vehicle and turn around," the officer commanded. The pleasantness had left his voice entirely. It was an order now. Darnell hesitated. He cut his eyes toward his friends in the passenger seat. They were not laughing anymore. They were staring down at their phones, doing their best to be invisible. "This is ridiculous," Darnell muttered. He turned around. The officer seized Darnell's wrists and the handcuffs clicked shut. The sound of the metal ratchets was sharp and final. "Hey!" Darnell shouted, struggling against the restraint. "You cannot do this. What am I even being arrested for?" "You are under arrest for operating a motor vehicle with an expired registration and no active insurance," the officer stated. "Also, your license was suspended this morning on account of unpaid fines." "Unpaid fines," Darnell yelled. "My dad takes care of the fines. Check the system." "This is a mistake." "No mistake," the officer said, turning Darnell around to face him. "The vehicle has been flagged for repossession by the leasing agency. They reported a default on the payments." Darnell's face went pale. The arrogance drained clean out of him, and what was left behind looked small and scared. "Dad," he whispered. The officer walked him to the back of the cruiser. Darnell had to duck his head to climb in. The seat was hard plastic, nothing like the soft leather he had grown accustomed to. Through the wire mesh, he watched a tow truck pull up. He watched the driver hook chains to his orange car. He watched his friends step out of the vehicle and walk away without a word, leaving him behind. They did not even glance back. At the precinct, Darnell was processed like any other person under arrest. They took his fingerprints. They took his mugshot. They took his belt and his shoelaces. They placed him in a holding cell with a man who was shouting at the wall and a teenager caught shoplifting. Darnell sat down on the cold metal bench. The smell of the cell was a blend of stale urine and industrial cleaner. He waited for a lawyer to appear. He waited for me to burst through those doors and demand they let him go, but nobody came. After 3 hours, a guard strolled over. "Hargrove, you get one phone call," the guard said flatly. "Make it count." Darnell rushed to the phone on the wall. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the numbers right. He did not call me. Somewhere deep down, he already knew I was the one who had killed the engine. He called the only person he believed could rescue him. He called Vivian. "Mom," he choked into the receiver when she answered. "Mom, you have to come and get me. I am in jail." The officer arrested me. They took the car. They said the insurance was gone. You need to bring $500 for bail. Please, Mom. It is frightening in here. A silence settled over the line. A long, heavy silence. Mom, Darnell asked, are you there? Then he heard Vivian crying. It was a broken, hollowed-out sound. I cannot come, Darnell, Vivian whispered. What do you mean? Darnell shouted. Just use the emergency card. Take the cash from the safe. Get me out of here. There is no cash, Darnell. Vivian said, her voice cracking. The house is gone. The cards are frozen. Your father cut us off. He cut every one of us off. We are at a budget lodge off the highway, and they just declined my card for the room. We are going to have to sleep in the car tonight, Darnell. Except we have no car because Garrett lost his company car as well. Darnell squeezed the receiver. It felt slick against his sweating palm. So, you were just going to leave me here? He asked, his voice unsteady. You were going to leave me sitting in a jail cell. I have nothing left, son. Vivian wept. I have nothing. I cannot help you. The line went dead. Darnell hung the phone back on its hook. He turned and faced the cell. The man who had been yelling at the wall had gone quiet and was watching him now. Darnell slid down the wall until he reached the floor. He pulled his knees up against his chest. For 28 years, he had moved through the world with a golden parachute strapped to his back. He had been hurling himself off cliffs fully expecting to float. Today he hit the earth and understood that without Clifton Hargrove there to catch him, he was just another broke man locked in a cage. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in his life, the tears he shed were not for show. He cried because he was hungry. He cried because he was utterly alone. And he cried because he understood that tomorrow was going to be even worse. The neon sign outside the window flickered with a maddening buzz. Every 3 seconds it threw a sickly pink light into the room. Buzz, pink, darkness, buzz, pink, darkness. That rhythm was steadily pushing the people in room 104 toward the edge. This was the Clearview Motel, and there was nothing clear about it. There was only the smell of stale cigarette smoke that had worked itself deep into the yellowed wallpaper over the years. There was the smell of mildew drifting out of the bathroom, where the faucet dripped its own relentless, maddening beat. And there was the smell of 3 people who were accustomed to imported silk and Egyptian cotton, now sweating in polyester clothes they had been wearing for 2 days running. Vivian sat perched on the edge of the sagging mattress. She stared down at the carpet. It was a dark brown shade chosen probably to hide what it could no longer hide. She could make out cigarette burns. She could see dark splotches that looked like dried blood or old wine. She drew her knees together and wrapped her arms around herself. She was cold despite the thick humidity pressing in around her. The air conditioning unit rattled in the window frame like a dying machine. Whatever it pushed out smelled of wet dog and dust. She looked around the room. It was smaller than her walk-in closet back at Ridgecrest Manor. 2 double beds had been crammed into the space. Garrett lay stretched out on one, staring up at the water stains on the ceiling. Renata paced the narrow strip of floor between the beds and the dresser. 3 steps forward, turn 3 steps back, turn. A caged animal, but without the grace. This cannot be happening, Renata muttered. She had said it 100 times in the past hour. This is a nightmare. I am going to wake up in my canopy bed and the maid will bring me my green juice. Shut up, Renata! Garrett groaned, not moving his eyes from the ceiling. Just shut up. Your voice is giving me a headache. I am hungry, Garrett. Renata snapped, stopping her pacing to glare across at him. I have not eaten since breakfast yesterday. Do something about it. You are the man. Go find us food. Garrett laughed. A dry, bitter sound. With what money, Renata? Your father froze all the accounts. My wallet is completely empty. Unless you want me to go stand on a street corner and beg we are not eating tonight. Vivian felt a pang of guilt twist deep in her stomach. It was sharp and had nothing to do with hunger. Her thoughts went to Darnell. Her boy was sitting in a jail cell right now. He was probably cold. He was probably scared. And here she was, sitting in a motel room feeling sorry for herself over scratchy sheets. We have to get Darnell out, Vivian whispered. Garrett sat up. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The springs shrieked beneath him. Forget Darnell, Vivian. He is safer sitting in that jail than we are in here. At least they feed him 3 times a day. We are the ones in real trouble. Look at what we have become. The great Hargrove family hiding in a dump that charges $30 a night. He rose and moved to the window, pulling back the greasy curtain to peer out at the parking lot. Their car was not there because they had no car. They had arrived by taxi, burning through the last of Garrett's cash to pay the driver and the motel clerk. They were stranded. "This is your doing, you know," Garrett said, turning to face Vivienne. "My doing." Vivienne gasped. "How is any of this my fault? Clifton is the one behind all of this. He is the one causing the damage. Clifton is reacting to you." Garrett shot back. He closed the distance between them. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie hung loose around his neck, limp as a noose. "You are his wife. You were supposed to handle him. You were supposed to keep the man content so the money kept flowing, but instead, you treated him like he was beneath you. You humiliated him in front of everyone. You pushed him past his limit, Vivienne. And now, all of us are paying the price for your arrogance." Renata stepped between them. "Do not speak to my mother that way, Garrett. You have a nerve. You were the one who planned that party. You were the one who told the paramedics not to come back. You were the one who tried to stick him in a nursing home. You wanted that house," Renata Garrett shouted, rounding on his wife, "and who was demanding the Hermes bags, who wanted every trip to Paris. You wanted every last bit of that lifestyle, but you never wanted to work for a cent of it. I married you thinking you were part of a safety net. I thought I was marrying into a dynasty. Turns out I married a parasite clinging to a construction worker." Renata's mouth fell open. "You married me for money," Garrett sneered. "It certainly was not for your personality. You are a spoiled child, Renata. You have never earned a single dollar in your life. You think money is something that simply appears. Well, guess what? The man making it appear has quit. The show is finished." "I hate you," Renata screamed. "I hate you." "The feeling is completely mutual," Garrett yelled back. Vivienne pressed her hands over her ears. "Stop it. Both of you stop it. We are family. We need to hold together." "Family," Garrett laughed. "We are not a family, Vivienne. We are a corporation that has just gone under, and you are the CEO who steered us into the ground." He crossed to the dresser and snatched up the ice bucket. It was empty. He hurled it against the wall. The plastic cracked with a sharp snap. "We need cash," he said, breathing hard. "We need cash right now. We need a lawyer. We need to take Clifton to court to get at the trust. If we can get someone to file an emergency injunction, we might still free up the accounts. But lawyers cost money." He turned to Vivienne, his eyes narrowed. "Wait," he said slowly. "What?" Vivienne asked, pressing herself back against the headboard. "The rainy day fund," Garrett said. He stepped toward her. "The emergency account, the one Clifton set up for you 10 years ago. He mentioned it to me once. Said he had put $50,000 in a separate account in your name, only just in case something happened to him." Renata's eyes went wide. She turned to her mother. "Mom, is that true? Do you actually have $50,000? Vivienne looked down at her hands. She worked her wedding ring around her finger. The diamond caught the dim light. It was the only thing of value she still possessed. "Mom?" Renata said, her voice climbing with hope. "Answer him. Is the money there?" Vivienne said nothing. She bit her lip. "Mom," Garrett shouted, "where is that money? We can use it. We can get a proper hotel. We can get a lawyer. We can get Darnell out. Give me the account code." Vivienne started to cry, soft, pathetic sobs that rolled through her shoulders. "I do not have it," she whispered. "What do you mean you do not have it?" Garrett demanded. "Did Clifton freeze that account too?" "No," Vivienne sobbed. "He did not freeze it. It is gone." "Gone?" Renata asked. "Gone where I spent it," Vivienne cried. "On what?" Garrett yelled. $50,000. "Vivienne, what exactly did you buy?" "Another fur coat, more jewelry." "We can sell it." "Where is it?" "I did not buy anything," Vivienne wailed. She looked up at them, tears streaming down her face, destroying her mascara. "I lost it." The room went silent. The buzz of the neon sign seemed to swell in the quiet. "You lost it," Garrett repeated. "How?" Gambling, Vivienne confessed. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in that cramped room, it landed like a shout. "Online poker. And that investment scheme, the crypto thing you told us about last year, Garrett. You said it was a sure thing. You said it would double in a month." Garrett's face drained of color. "That was a high-risk play, Vivienne. I said, put a small amount and not the entire emergency fund. I wanted my own money too," Vivienne cried. "I wanted something of my own, so I was not going to Clifton with my hand out for every penny. I wanted to surprise everyone. I put $20,000 into the crypto, and it collapsed. Then I tried to win it back at the virtual casino. I kept telling myself that one big hand would let me put it back before Clifton ever knew. But I kept losing. I lost every cent. The account has been empty for 6 months. Renata stared at her mother. She looked at the woman who had always judged her for her spending, the woman who had picked apart every choice she ever made, the woman who had carried herself like the queen of the manor. "You gambled our safety net away," Renata whispered. "I was trying to help," Vivian pleaded. "I wanted to stand on my own." "You are an addict," Garrett said with contempt. He dropped onto the other bed and buried his face in his hands. "We are finished. We are completely finished. We have nothing to bargain with, nothing to fall back on. We are stuck in a roach motel with a gambling addict. Do not call me that." Vivian snapped, reaching for whatever dignity she could find. "I am your mother." "You are nothing," Renata said. Her voice was flat and cold. Renata moved closer to the bed. She stood over her mother. The rage that had been coiling inside her for days finally had somewhere to land. Not Clifton, not Garrett. The woman who had raised her to be helpless and then failed to deliver the one thing she had always been good for: money. "You let Dad go to that hospital alone," Renata said. "You held up the ambulance over a plate, and now it turns out you stole our future out from under us." "That was my money," Vivian argued weakly. "That was Dad's money," Renata screamed. "Everything is Dad's money. You never earned a single dime." Renata raised her hand. She did not stop to think about it. It was an impulse born out of hunger and fear and pure undiluted hatred. She slapped Vivian across the face. The sound cracked through the room like a pistol shot. Vivian's head snapped sideways. She gasped, her hand flying to her cheek. She looked at her daughter with stunned, disbelieving eyes. Renata had never once defied her. Renata had always been her little doll. "You hit me," Vivian whispered. "I should have done it years ago," Renata hissed. She did not look remotely sorry. She looked free. Garrett did not move to help Vivian. He did not scold Renata. He simply sat there staring at the floor, a twisted little smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Welcome to the real world, ladies," he murmured. Vivian curled herself into a ball on the mattress. She dragged the thin blanket up over her head to hide from her daughter's gaze. She cried into the pillow, and not one person offered her comfort. In that cramped, reeking room, the family bond they had always assumed was forged in gold turned out to be made of nothing but greed. And now that the greed had nothing left to feed on, they were ready to devour each other. The Hargrove dynasty had officially crumbled, not with a thunderclap, but with a slap in a $30 motel room. Outside, the neon sign kept buzzing. Buzz, pink darkness, just like their future. The smoke from the applewood chips curled up into the late afternoon sky. It carried the smell of summer and freedom. I sat out on the porch of the small farmhouse I had quietly purchased 5 years ago. It was no mansion, it had no marble floors, no crystal chandeliers. What it had was wide wooden floorboards that groaned softly underfoot and a tin roof that sang when the rain came down. It was perfect. Around me sat 3 men who had known me long before I had money. There was Rupert, who laid bricks alongside me back in the 80s. What comes next stopped me cold the first time I lived through it. The people I had protected longest were the ones I should have watched most closely. Before we get there, let me ask you this. If you discovered that someone you had quietly carried for years had been counting on your silence, would you confront them face to face or let your actions speak for you? There was Odell, who ran the finest barbecue joint in Gastonia, and there was Elwood, my lawyer and my oldest friend. We were drinking iced tea and laughing over a fishing trip we had taken together 20 years ago. For the first time in a decade, my chest felt light. The tightness that had lived with me out at Ridgecrest Manor was gone. But peace is a fragile thing when you still have unfinished business. I saw the dust cloud before I made out the car. It was a battered sedan, a cheap rideshare, or a taxi crawling down the long gravel driveway. Behind it came a rusted hatchback, driven by a man who looked like he had slept in his clothes. That would be the private investigator. I had expected them to hire a top firm, but without my money behind them, they had to settle for a bottom feeder who would likely track me down by following Elwood. "Here comes the circus," Rupert said, quietly setting down his glass. I did not stir from my rocking chair. I watched the taxi skid to a stop in front of the iron gate. The gate was locked. I had put it in myself the previous week. 6 feet high, solid steel. The taxi doors flew open. They poured out like trash from an overturned can. Vivienne was unrecognizable. Her hair had gone frizzy in the humidity. Her designer dress was creased and stained. She wore sandals too small for her swollen feet. Garrett looked like a man coming apart, shirt hanging open halfway down his chest, face blazing with heat and rage. Renata trailed behind them, staring at her phone as though a signal might materialize and rescue her. None of them noticed the peace around them. They did not see the beauty in the surrounding trees or the vegetable garden I had put in. They only saw a fortress they needed to crack open. Clifton Vivian screamed. She seized the iron bars of the gate and shook them, her voice fractured. "Clifton, I know you are in there. Open this gate right now. You cannot disappear from us." I lifted my tea and took a long, slow sip. I looked over at Elwood. He gave a nod and got to his feet. He walked down the porch steps and came to rest halfway along the path just beyond shouting range. The commotion had drawn attention. My farm sits in a quiet community where neighbors watch out for one another. Mrs. Albrecht from next door appeared on her porch drying her hands on her apron. Old Mr. Coburn, who lives across the road, ambled out to his mailbox and squinted at the disturbance. To them, I was simply the friendly older man who had mended their fences. They had no inkling of the war that had followed me here. Garrett spotted the neighbors. Something lit up behind his desperate eyes. He decided to work the audience. He turned away from the gate and faced Mrs. Albrecht. He spread his arms wide. "Please help us," he called out, his voice thick with manufactured anguish. "We have been out of our minds with worry. My father-in-law is trapped in there. He has severe dementia. He wandered away from the hospital a week ago. We have been looking everywhere." He thrust a shaking finger toward Elwood. "That man is holding him against his will," Garrett cried. "He is exploiting a confused old man to get at his savings. We are only trying to bring our father home safely. Someone please call the police." Mrs. Albrecht looked troubled. She moved toward her phone. She was a decent woman, and the thought of elder abuse shook her. Vivienne took her cue. She sagged against the bars of the gate, weeping in great theatrical waves. "Oh, Clifton," she wailed. "My poor husband. He has no idea what he is doing. He needs his medication. He needs his family." Renata stood by the taxi with her arms folded. She looked bored by the performance, but she played her part. "Daddy, please come out. We are not angry with you. We just want to look after you." I sat in my chair on that porch and felt a cold fire burning in my gut. There they were, doing it all over again. Rewriting the story to fit whatever they needed it to say, casting themselves as the rescuers and me as the helpless victim. The same lie they had been telling for years. Clifton is simple. Clifton is old. Clifton needs us to manage things for him. I stood up. My knees were stiff, but my back was straight. I came down the steps. I walked past Elwood. I walked the whole length of that path to the gate. I stopped 2 feet from the bars and looked Vivian directly in the eye. The weeping stopped at once. Her gaze shifted past my shoulder, scanning the property, hunting for signs of wealth, looking for anything left to take. "Clifton," she whispered, "open the gate. We are starving. We have nowhere left to go. Darnell is in jail. You have to fix this." I turned my eyes to Garrett. He was still performing for the crowd. "Open the gate." Clifton Garrett hissed low enough that the neighbors could not pick it up. "Or, I swear to God, I will sue you for every cent you have left. Abandonment is a crime. You are legally obligated to support your wife. I have already spoken to an attorney. If you shut us out, I will make sure every paper in Charlotte drags your name through the mud." I looked at Renata. "Daddy, this place is disgusting," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Just sign a check so we can get to a proper hotel. I need a shower." I looked past all three of them toward the neighbors. Mrs. Albrecht was now posted at her fence listening. Old Mr. Coburn had moved in closer. Several other people had pulled over to see what was happening. "You want to talk about abandonment, Garrett," I said. My voice was steady. It traveled easily in the quiet country air. "Yes," Garrett shouted, finding his footing again. "You abandoned your family. You canceled the cards. You locked us out of our home. You left your wife with absolutely nothing. You are a cruel, sick old man." He swung toward the onlookers. "Did you all hear that he put his own wife out on the street? He is letting his own grandson rot in a jail cell. What kind of man does that?" A murmur moved through the small crowd. People looked my way with something that wasn't trust. Garrett was a capable salesman. He knew how to move a lie. I gave Elwood a nod. Elwood reached into his briefcase. He did not pull out legal paperwork. He pulled out a large portable Bluetooth speaker. He placed it on the hood of my truck, which sat near the gate. He drew out his phone and touched the screen. "I want each of you to listen carefully," I said to the crowd. "What you are about to hear is the recording from the Mecklenburg County Emergency Dispatch. It was made 7 days ago at 8:45 in the evening. Garrett's color left his face. He knew that date. He knew that time. "No!" he shouted, throwing himself at the gate. "Shut it off! You cannot play that. That is private." The audio crackled out of the speaker. It was loud. It bounced off the trees. It bounced off the metal of the gate. The voice of a young paramedic filled the air. "Ma'am, his vitals are unstable. This is not a drill. He could die." Then came the sounds behind it, the clink of glasses, the swell of laughter, the sound of a string quartet playing Beethoven. Then came Renata's voice, sharp, annoyed, and clear as a bell. "Look, we are right in the middle of the toasts. Garrett is about to cut the cake. We cannot leave right now. It would ruin the whole flow of the party. Just give him some oxygen and tell him to sleep it off." The crowd fell absolutely silent. Mrs. Albrecht raised her hand to her mouth. The recording pressed on. But ma'am, the medic said, "Stop calling me." Renata's voice cut in. "If he is truly sick, use his insurance card. Do not bill us." The recording ended with the click of a phone being hung up. The silence that came after was heavier than the humid air. It was a silence of judgment. A silence of total condemnation. I looked out at the neighbors. Mrs. Albrecht was no longer watching me with any suspicion. She was staring at Vivienne and Renata with open disgust. Mr. Coburn spat on the ground and shook his head. "You cut the cake," Mrs. Albrecht said, her voice unsteady with fury. "Your father was dying, and you were worried about a cake. It was taken out of context," Garrett stammered, retreating from the gate. "We thought he was faking it." "Faking a heart attack," Mr. Coburn bellowed. "Get away from here. You people make me sick." Vivienne shrank back. She watched the neighbors closing in toward the gate, not to help her, but to drive her off. She turned her eyes to me. "Clifton, please," she begged. It was not the way it looked. I was in shock. I looked at her. I saw the woman I had stood beside 40 years ago at the altar. But the love was gone. In its place sat a deep, exhausted pity. "You chose the party, Vivienne," I said softly. "Now go back to it." I turned away from them. I walked back toward the house. Behind me, I could hear Garrett shouting his threats. I could hear Renata crying. I could hear the neighbors driving them off, telling them to leave before someone called the sheriff for trespassing. "Clifton, come back!" Vivienne screamed. "You cannot do this. We are your family." I settled back into my rocking chair. Rupert handed me my iced tea. The ice had mostly melted, but the sweetness was still there. "That is not family," Rupert said, watching the dust drift down as the taxi swung around and sped off. "That is just a debt you finally cleared." I gave a slow nod. I took a sip. The sun was going down, bleeding the sky in deep purples and gold. It was the most beautiful sunset I had ever witnessed. Because for the first time in my life, I was not watching it through the glass of a house I had paid for, but never truly owned. I was watching it as a free man. And the quiet that followed was not the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of victory. I thought I had glimpsed rock bottom the day my family left me to die in a hospital bed. I thought their greed had reached its lowest point when they tried to force their way into my home. I was wrong. The bottom of that barrel went far deeper and far darker than anything I had imagined. 2 days after the standoff at the farm gate, a sheriff's deputy rolled up to my porch. He was young, and he wore his discomfort plainly. He passed me a thick manila envelope. He could not bring himself to meet my eyes when he said I had been served. I tore it open right there on the porch steps. The first page was a petition filed in the Mecklenburg County Superior Court. It was a petition for emergency conservatorship. The plaintiffs were Garrett Caldwell and Renata Hargrove. The defendant was Clifton Hargrove. I read every word they had put to paper. They were no longer satisfied with my money. Now they wanted my mind. They claimed I was suffering from advanced cognitive decline. They argued that my recent conduct, specifically the closing of bank accounts and the removal of family members from the property, stood as clear proof of a mental breakdown. They painted me as paranoid, erratic, and a danger to myself. They claimed I had fallen under the undue influence of a predatory outside party named Elwood, who was working to manipulate me and seize the family estate. It was a work of fiction worthy of a prize. They took what was my strength and reframed it as weakness. They took what was my justice and reframed it as madness. And they were petitioning a court to strip away my rights. They wanted to remove my ability to sign checks. They wanted to take away my right to decide where I laid my head at night. They wanted to install Garrett as my legal guardian. The man who could not keep his own hedge fund afloat wanted to run my life. I sat there a long time with the papers in my lap. Another man, a different father, might have been shattered, might have wept at the depth of the betrayal. But I did not weep. A strange stillness came over me. It was the stillness of a soldier who at last sees the enemy step out into the open. They had made a fatal mistake. They believed I was a senile old man who would buckle under the weight of a lawsuit. What they did not know was that for 20 years I had been readying myself for exactly this kind of war, even before I knew who I'd be fighting. I drove to Elwood's office the next morning. It sat inside a brick building downtown. Nothing about it was flashy. Elwood had no use for glass walls or fancy espresso machines. He believed in oak desks and hard work. When I walked in, he already looked worried. A copy of the lawsuit was spread open on his desk. "Clifton," he said, pressing his fingers to his temples. "This is serious. They have hired a lawyer named Alton Beckwith. He is cheap, but he is loud. He will turn this into a spectacle. He will drag your name through the mud. He will call you incompetent. He will call me a thief." I lowered myself into the leather chair across from him. I did not look worried. I reached into my canvas bag and drew out a book. Not a tablet, not a laptop. A physical book bound in black leather. The spine was cracked with age. The corners had been worn smooth. It carried the smell of old paper and history. I set it down on the desk with a heavy thud. Elwood looked at it. "What is this?" he asked. "I call it the Ledger of Truth," I said. I opened the cover. The pages were dense with my handwriting, row upon row of entries stretching back 2 decades. "You see, Elwood," I said, running a finger along a line from 2004. I knew my children had a sickness with money long ago, but I never confronted them. I never raised my voice. I simply wrote it down. I turned the page. Here is the entry from 2009 when Garrett came to me asking for $50,000 to launch a business. He told me it was a tech startup. I looked into it. There was no startup. He used the money to settle a gambling debt in Las Vegas. I never let on that I knew. I just wrote it down. I moved to the next page. Here is the entry from when Renata wrecked her car while driving under the influence. I paid to keep it off the record so she could finish college. I covered the damages. She told me a rainstorm caused the accident. I knew she was lying. I wrote it down. I flipped through the book. There were hundreds of entries, money lent and never returned, lies passed around the Thanksgiving table, things that vanished from my home without explanation. Every act of betrayal logged with dates, figures, and evidence. "They say I am senile," I told Elwood. "They say I no longer know what I am doing. This book proves I have been the only one paying attention for 2 decades. They think they are walking into a hearing to take advantage of a confused old man. They are walking into a trap." Elwood lifted the book. He read through a handful of pages. A slow smile spread across his face, the smile of a shark catching the scent of blood. "Yet this is admissible," he said. "This is contemporaneous evidence, Clifton. This is not merely a defense. This is a weapon." "Then let us go use it," I said. The morning of the hearing came in gray and drizzling. It was fitting weather for a funeral, because that is precisely what this was. The funeral of whatever remained between me and my children. We entered the courtroom. It was a small room with wood-paneled walls and stale air. Garrett and Renata were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They had dressed carefully for the occasion. Garrett wore a muted gray suit that read as modest. Renata had on a high-necked black dress with no jewelry. They looked like sorrowful children who had been forced into a painful duty by love for their father. Vivian sat in the gallery behind them, pressing a tissue to her eyes. When I walked in, not one of them looked my way. They stared straight ahead. Maybe shame had found them after all. Or maybe they were just rehearsing their lines. Their lawyer, Alton Beckwith, rose to his feet. He was a short man with a loud tie and a smile that looked like it had been applied with a brush. He glanced at me with practiced sympathy. We took our seats. The judge entered. She was a stern woman, glasses balanced near the tip of her nose. She wore the look of someone who had already sat through too many family disputes that week. Judge Weston settled in. We could begin. Mr. Beckwith stood. He buttoned his jacket. He moved to the center of the room. No microphone, but his voice carried. "Your Honor," he opened, "we come before you today with heavy hearts. My clients, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, love their father deeply. For decades, Clifton Hargrove was a cornerstone of this community, a strong man, a generous man. But time spares none of us. He turned and pointed toward me. In the past 6 months, Clifton has not been himself. He has grown paranoid. He has grown hostile. He cut his family off from their financial resources without any warning. He forced his own daughter out of her home. He has refused medical guidance following a massive heart attack. These are not the choices of a man in full possession of his faculties. These are the choices of a mind in serious decline. Beckwith moved toward the witness stand, where Garrett sat waiting to be called. We believe that Mr. Hargrove is suffering from dementia. We believe he is being manipulated by his attorney, Mr. Elwood, who has isolated him from those who love him in order to gain control of the estate. We are asking this court to intervene. We are asking for emergency conservatorship to be granted to Garrett Caldwell so that he may protect his father's assets and see to it that he receives the medical care he so urgently needs. Garrett nodded with great solemnity, fixing the judge with wide, earnest eyes. I sat and I listened. I did not shift in my seat. I did not allow my face to darken. I held it as still and flat as stone. Inside, I was quietly marveling at the sheer audacity of it all. They were using my own money to hire a lawyer, whose job was to declare me incompetent. They were turning my generosity into evidence against me. The judge looked over in my direction. Mr. Hargrove, do you have a response? Elwood rose to his feet. He did not move to the center of the room. He stayed behind his table. He looked composed. He looked like a man with something sharp in his pocket. Your Honor, Elwood said, we do not deny that Mr. Hargrove cut off his family. We do not deny that he removed them from the property, but we reject entirely the notion that these are the acts of a man who has lost his mind. We intend to demonstrate that they are the acts of a man who finally opened his eyes. Beckwith let out a short, contemptuous laugh. Opened his eyes? He left them without a roof. He is sitting on millions while his own grandson rots in a jail cell. That is either cruelty, Your Honor, or it is madness. It is justice, Elwood said quietly. Beckwith waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. We have medical experts, Your Honor. We have family testimony. We have a documented timeline of erratic behavior. The judge glanced at the clock. Mr. Beckwith, call your first witness. Beckwith called Garrett to the stand. Garrett walked up with the bearing of a man who believed he had already won. He rested his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The irony sat in the room like a bad smell. Mr. Caldwell. Beckwith said, tell the court about the night of the party. Tell us about your father's state of mind. Garrett drew a slow breath. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were flat and cold. He was confused, Garrett said. He arrived in an old suit thinking he was attending a funeral. He started breaking dishes in the kitchen. He was screaming at my wife. We tried to settle him down, but he collapsed. We called the ambulance right away. We wanted to ride along with him, but he turned violent and told us to stay back. He was not himself. Lies. Every single word was a fabricated brick in a wall they had been building for months. Beckwith smiled. And the finances. When did you first notice something was wrong? Last week, Garrett said. He drained the accounts. He stopped covering the bills. He even canceled the insurance on my son's vehicle, which is what led to his arrest. He is tearing down everything he spent a lifetime building because he is convinced we are robbing him blind. But we have never taken a single dime that was not given to us willingly. I glanced down at the black book sitting on the table in front of me. My hand lay flat on the cover. I could feel the grain of the leather beneath my fingers. I could feel the weight of what was inside. Garrett concluded his testimony with a tear tracking down one cheek. I just want my dad back, he said. I want to know he is safe. Beckwith turned to Elwood with a satisfied look. Your witness. Elwood stood. He did not reach for a notepad. He picked up the black book. He moved at an unhurried pace toward the witness stand. The room held its breath. The air conditioner hummed in the background. Mr. Caldwell, Elwood said, you say you have never taken a dime that was not given freely. You say your purpose here is to protect your father's estate. Yes, Garrett said. I am a financial professional. I understand how to manage an estate. Elwood nodded slowly. He set the black book on the railing of the witness stand. He opened it to a page flagged with a red sticky note. Then perhaps you can account for this entry dated August 12th, 2017, Elwood said, Garrett looked at the open page. He squinted. "What is that supposed to be?" he asked. Elwood read from the page in a clear, unhurried voice. August 12th. Garrett requested $20,000 for emergency home repairs following a flood. Inspection of the property revealed no flood damage. Bank records confirm a transfer of $20,000 to an offshore gambling site on August 13th. The color left Garrett's face like water draining from a tub. "Objection!" Beckwith shouted, lurching to his feet. "What is this book? Where did it come from?" "This," Elwood said, turning to face the judge, "is a detailed ledger maintained by Clifton Hargrove across 20 years. It records every transaction, every loan extended, and every lie told by the plaintiff. And we have the bank records to substantiate every entry." The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Continue, Mr. Elwood." Elwood turned the page. November 4th, 2019. Elwood read, Garrett requested funds for a charity gala table, $10,000. The check was cashed at a liquor store in downtown Charlotte. No charitable donation was ever made. Garrett began to sweat. He tugged at his collar. "That is not accurate," he stammered. "That is fabricated. He wrote it himself." "He is crazy, you heard it yourselves." Elwood looked at Garrett. He looked at him the way a man looks at something he has already figured out completely. "We have the canceled check, Mr. Caldwell, and it carries your signature on the back." I watched from my seat. I saw the confidence cave in on itself. I saw fear move in to fill the space. The first round was finished, and the finishing blow had not yet been thrown. The courtroom had gone still after the ledger was laid bare, but the battle was nowhere near its end. Garrett Caldwell sat in the witness box, dragging a trembling hand across his damp forehead. He shot a desperate look at Beckwith, searching for something to hold on to. Beckwith rose to object, arguing that the financial records were circumstantial, but Elwood was already moving on to the next phase. Elwood did not return to his seat. He crossed to the large monitor that had been positioned for the defense. He plugged in the black USB drive, the same one I had left on the hospital bed, the one that had locked them out of the accounts, and now it was about to lock them out of something else entirely. "Your Honor," Elwood said, his voice steady and unhurried, "the plaintiffs contend that Clifton Hargrove is paranoid. They contend that his belief that his family has been scheming against him is the product of a deteriorating mind. We would like to present Exhibit B. This footage was captured by the security system inside Ridgecrest Manor approximately 3 weeks before Mr. Hargrove's heart attack." Garrett went rigid. He had known about the cameras along the perimeter. What he had not known was that there were cameras inside. I had put them there myself, concealed inside smoke detectors, not to surveil my family, but to protect the house. I never anticipated what they would end up recording. The monitor came to life. The date stamp read, a Thursday afternoon. The angle looked down over the mansion's living room, which was flooded with afternoon light. Renata was out at her yoga class, but Garrett was home, and he was not alone. A woman walked into the frame beside him. The courtroom drew a sharp breath. This was no stranger. It was Bridget Renata's closest friend, since their college days, the woman who had stood beside her as maid of honor at the wedding, the same woman now seated in the second row of the gallery, having come to lend her support. On screen, Garrett and Bridget settled onto the sofa. Garrett poured 2 glasses of my expensive Scotch whiskey. He handed one to her. Then he leaned in and kissed her, not a light, casual kiss, but something long and deliberate that dropped the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. Renata made a sound like something had been torn loose inside her. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes jumped back and forth between the screen and the back of the gallery, where Bridget was now folding herself down in her seat, trying to disappear. But the video was not finished. The audio came through clean and sharp. "I cannot wait much longer," Garrett said on screen, lifting his glass of scotch. "The old man is healthy as a horse. He's going to live forever and hold on to that money until he hits 100. Bridget laughed. She dragged her fingers through Garrett's hair. "Just be patient, baby. Renata says he has high blood pressure. Maybe we will get lucky." Garrett smirked. Renata. God, I cannot stand her anymore. She bleeds money but has no clue how to make it. If it were not for her father's trust fund, I would have walked out on her 5 years ago. I am only here for what is coming to me. Bridget, the moment the old man goes and Renata collects her share of the inheritance, I am going to divorce her so fast her head will spin. And then it will be just you and me and $50 million. The footage ended. The screen went dark. The silence lasted exactly 1 second before it was split open by a sound like a wounded animal. It was Renata. She was on her feet before anyone in the room could react, her chair toppling backward with a crack against the floor. Her face had gone somewhere beyond fury. She did not look at the judge. She did not look at me. She fixed every ounce of it on Garrett, who was still planted in the witness box, looking like a man already hollowed out. "You monster," Renata screamed. "You filthy coward. You slept with Bridget." She did not walk. She launched herself across the gap between the plaintiff's table and the witness stand. The bailiff never had a chance. She came down on Garrett with everything she had, her nails finding his face, her hands seizing his expensive hair and pulling without mercy. "You told me you loved me," she shrieked, landing a slap across his cheek. "You said I was your queen. You were just sitting there waiting for my father to die. All you ever wanted was the money." Garrett threw his arms up, trying to cover himself. "Get off me, you crazy witch!" he shouted. "Security! Somebody help me!" Renata spun her fury toward the gallery. She thrust a trembling finger at Bridget, who was edging toward the back door. "And you!" Renata screamed, tears cutting through her makeup and running down her face. "You sat at my dinner table. You held my hand while I cried about him working late. You knew. You both knew." The judge hammered her gavel. "Order!" Bailiff restrained the plaintiff immediately. 2 bailiffs took hold of Renata by the arms. She was kicking and wailing. The carefully assembled life she had put on display had detonated in front of a room full of strangers. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wild and wet. "Daddy, did you know?" she cried. "Did you know he was doing this?" I looked back at her from where I sat. I did not smile. I did not frown. "Yes," I said quietly. "I tried to tell you last year, but you said I was just jealous of your happiness, so I let you see it for yourself." Renata buckled into the bailiff's arms, weeping without restraint. Garrett sat in the witness box, a scratch bleeding on his cheek. His reputation was wreckage. His marriage was finished. His secret was in the open. The so-called financial genius had been exposed for exactly what he was, a gold-digging cheat. Elwood waited while Renata was guided back to her seat and handed a glass of water. The judge looked as though she had swallowed something sour. This had ceased to be a conservatorship hearing. It had become a spectacle, and she had run out of patience. "Mr. Elwood," the judge said, her voice like a blade, "do you have more evidence, or shall I put this circus out of its misery right now?" "Just one more piece, Your Honor," Elwood said. He turned his attention toward Vivienne. My wife was seated next to Renata, making a show of comforting her daughter, but her eyes were sweeping the room with barely concealed panic. She could feel which way the current was running. She could see that Garrett was spent. Her remaining play was to cast herself as the victim. Beckwith read the same threat and rose to his feet. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Vivienne Hargrove, is an innocent party in all of this, separate entirely from Mr. Garrett Caldwell's personal indiscretions. Mrs. Hargrove is the legal wife of Clifton Hargrove. She has been abandoned. She has been left without means. Under state law, she is entitled to access to marital assets for her basic living needs. We ask the court to order the immediate release of funds to Mrs. Hargrove." Elwood returned to his table. He opened a slim manila folder and drew out a single sheet of paper. The paper had gone yellow with age. "Your Honor," Elwood said, "under ordinary circumstances Mr. Beckwith would have a point. However, Mrs. Hargrove appears to have forgotten a document she herself signed on May 5, 2014. Vivienne went still. Her gaze locked onto the paper in Elwood's hand. Her mouth went dry. 10 years earlier, she had gotten into trouble with a loan shark over a gambling debt. She had come to me in tears, begging for a way out. I paid off the $40,000 she owed, but I told her plainly that it would be the last time. I would not let her pull the family down with her. I had her sign an agreement." Elwood passed the document to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. "This is a notarized post-nuptial agreement," Elwood announced. "In exchange for Mr. Hargrove settling her considerable gambling debts, Mrs. Vivienne Hargrove agreed to a full separation of assets. Clause 4 states that in the event of a separation or dispute, Mrs. Hargrove waives all claims to the CH Trust, the properties and the primary savings accounts. She agreed that she holds no legal right to Mr. Hargrove's estate beyond what he voluntarily chooses to provide." Vivienne got to her feet. Her legs were unsteady. No, she whispered. That was just a formality. Clifton told me it was just to scare off the loan sharks. He promised he would never actually use it. I looked at Vivian. I remembered that night clearly. I remembered paying the man who had threatened to break her legs. I remembered her sobbing and swearing she would change. She never changed. She simply became more careful about concealing it. I never promised I would not use it. Vivian, I said, I promised I would protect this family. And sometimes protecting the family means protecting it from you. Vivienne dropped back into her chair. She looked at Garrett, who was studying the floor. She looked at Renata, who was still in tears. She looked at the judge, who was reading the document with a tight expression. It was in that moment she understood her safety net had been cut away. She had spent 10 years believing she was the queen on the board, moving pieces at will, but she had only ever been a pawn, and she had been given up long ago. She had no money, she had no home. She had a husband who had finally stopped absorbing her damage. The judge closed the folder. She set her glasses on the bench. She surveyed the 3 people at the plaintiff's table. I have heard enough, she said. Her voice went through the room clean and cold. Mr. Hargrove, please rise. I stood. My back was straight. My heart was steady. The judge looked at Garrett. Mr. Caldwell, your petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. There is absolutely no evidence that Clifton Hargrove lacks competence. On the contrary, he appears to be the only person in this family with any grip on reality. You have wasted the time of this court. You have committed perjury, and you have attempted to turn the legal system into an instrument of theft. She looked toward Renata. Mrs. Caldwell, the eviction stands. The terms of the trust are unambiguous. You violated the clause of care. You have no rightful claim to the property. She looked at Vivienne. Mrs. Hargrove, the postnuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. You have no claim to the estate. The judge lifted her gavel. Furthermore, I am holding the plaintiffs liable for all legal costs incurred by the defendant. And, Mr. Garrett Caldwell, I am referring the full transcript of this hearing, along with the video evidence, to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud and elder abuse charges. She brought the gavel down. It landed like a gunshot. Case dismissed. The courtroom broke into noise. Reporters who had found their way in were already typing on their phones. Garrett buried his face in his hands. Renata stared blankly at the wall in front of her. Vivienne looked at me one final time. Her eyes were begging. She mouthed the word, please. I picked up my black ledger. I placed it back inside my canvas bag. I gave a nod to Elwood. We turned and walked together down the center aisle. I passed my wife. I passed my daughter. I passed the son-in-law I had once welcomed like my own blood. I did not slow down. I did not look back. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The air in the corridor was cool and clean. I stepped out into the daylight. I was 68 years old. I had no wife. I had no children I could call my own. But for the first time in 40 years, I was free. I breathed in deeply. It tasted like justice. The gavel had fallen inside that courtroom, but the sentence was still being carried out beyond those walls. I returned to my farm and switched off my phone. I had no need to watch the wreckage unfold. I understood exactly how gravity operates. When you climb high on a ladder built from lies, the fall is long, and the ground shows no mercy. My son Darnell was the first to hit it. He had managed to get himself out of jail on a signature bond because the facility was overcrowded. A sensible man would have kept himself scarce. A sensible man would have found work and started settling his debts. But Darnell was not a sensible man. He was a man who could not live without an audience. He borrowed a phone from one of his so-called friends and did the only thing he had ever been good at. He went live on social media. He sat on a curb outside the precinct. He positioned himself so the lighting caught the dark circles under his eyes. He worked up a few hollow tears. He hit record. He told the world I was a tyrant. He said I was in the grip of dementia and had abandoned my family in a paranoid rage. He claimed his mother was sleeping on the street because of a clerical error at the bank. He asked people for money. He set up a crowdfunding page and titled it, Help the Hargrove Family Survive Abuse. For about 2 hours it appeared to be working. Strangers sent donations. People left comments condemning me. Darnell smiled into the camera, thinking he had pulled it off, that he could play the court of public opinion, the same way he had always played his mother. But he had forgotten one thing. The internet watches everything. A nurse from Carolina's medical center came across the video. She remembered the empty room. She remembered the rude calls. She left a comment. "I was the charge nurse on the 3rd floor. Your father was dying, and you told us not to call back because you were cutting a cake. You are not a victim. You are a predator." Then the paramedic weighed in. He posted a transcript pulled directly from the ambulance call logs. He had redacted my name, but the timestamp lined up with Darnell's account perfectly. The tide reversed in an instant. The internet is a wild beast, and once it catches the scent, there is no calling it back. People tracked down the court records from the hearing, all public domain. They found the details of the eviction. They found the footage of Garrett's affair that had leaked out of the courtroom evidence file. Darnell's comment section became a battlefield. People called him a parasite. They called him a leech. They made memes of his crying face pasted over a photograph of a birthday cake. The hashtag #CakeOver Dad started trending in Charlotte. The crowdfunding platform flagged his campaign for fraud. They froze the account and reversed every donation one by one. Darnell watched the total slide from $2,000 back to zero in real time. He tried to pull the video down, but the moment had already passed. It had been shared thousands of times over. He walked out onto the street, and people knew who he was. They did not want his autograph. They threw sodas at him from passing cars. A pack of teenagers filmed him shuffling along in his dirty clothes and laughed at him from across the street. He ducked into an alley to hide. He was not merely broke, he was untouchable. He had set out to burn my reputation to the ground and had torched his own instead. While Darnell was crouching in an alley, Garrett was getting his first real education in how the corporate world actually works. He had been let go from his firm. He had been blacklisted by the regulatory bodies, but he still needed to eat. He still needed to cover the motel room if he wanted a roof over his head. He put on his wrinkled suit. He walked into an upscale steakhouse downtown, the same place where our family used to gather for dinners that I paid for. He asked to speak with the manager. He figured he could land something, a host position, a bartender's spot. He believed his charm still had currency. The manager was a man named Wendell. Garrett had undertipped him for years without a second thought. Wendell looked at Garrett. He took in the stains on his shirt. He took in the desperation written across his face. "I am looking for a position," Garrett said, working to sound assured. "Management consulting, even front of house. I have extensive experience with high-net-worth clients." Wendell reached for a newspaper sitting on the hostess stand. He dropped it flat on the counter. On the front page was a courtroom sketch of Garrett. The headline read, "The son-in-law who stole Christmas." "We do not hire thieves," Wendell said loudly enough for the room to hear. "And we certainly do not hire men who cheat on their wives and prey on the elderly. Get out of my restaurant before I call the health inspector to report a piece of garbage standing in the lobby." Garrett turned around. Every diner in the room was looking at him. He spotted a former colleague from another firm seated at table 4. The man immediately raised his menu to cover his face. Garrett walked out into the heat. He tried a diner next, then a fast food counter, then a car wash. Nobody would take him on. His face was too recognizable and his name too poisoned. In the end, he went around to the back door of a Greasy Spoon and asked if he could wash dishes for cash. The cook looked him over, then he spat on the ground. "I saw what you did to that old man," the cook said. "My father raised me on a construction site, same as yours did. If you were my son, I would have beaten you. I would not let you put your dirty hands anywhere near my dishes. Move along." Garrett sat down on the curb outside. His stomach was growling. He was beginning to understand that money could purchase forgiveness, but he had no money, and without it, he was just a bad man in a bad suit with no place to go. Renata was faring no better. She went to her yoga studio. She needed to find her center. She needed to carry on as though nothing had collapsed. She walked in with her mat tucked under her arm. The receptionist stepped into her path. Renata stopped. "What are you doing? I have a lifetime membership." "Your father paid for that membership," the receptionist said, "and he canceled it yesterday. And frankly, Renata, after what you put him through, we do not want you here. This is a place of peace. You bring chaos." Renata turned to go. Across the street, sitting at the smoothie bar, were the women she had called her closest friends, women she had traveled with, women she had shared every secret with. She raised her hand to wave, desperate for a familiar face to look back at her. They looked at her. Then they looked at one another. Then they turned their backs. One of them reached up and pulled the blinds shut. Renata stood alone on the sidewalk. She took out her phone to send a message. She had been removed from the group chat. She had been blocked across every platform. She was not just evicted from her house. She had been evicted from her entire life. She came to understand that her friends had never loved her. They had loved her father's credit card. Now that the card was gone, she had ceased to exist. The most tragic figure in all of this was Vivian, my wife, the woman who had shared my bed for 40 years. She was in the motel room when the manager banged on the door. "Checkout was at 11 o'clock, he called through the door. "It is noon. You have not paid for another night. Clear out." Vivian opened the door. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "Please," she said. "My son is on his way with money. He just needs a little more time." The manager looked past her into the disordered room. He shook his head. "I saw your son on the news. He is broke. So are you. You have 5 minutes to get your things together, or I put everything you own on the sidewalk." Vivienne packed what she had. Her suitcases had gone with the movers, so she used a trash bag. She folded in what few clothes remained. She walked out of the room. She passed the ice machine where she used to fill a bucket to chill her champagne. She stepped out into the parking lot and started walking. She had no destination. Her sandals were cutting into her feet. The sun pressed down on the back of her neck. She walked past a park. On a bench near the path, an old couple sat tossing bread to the birds. The man was peeling an orange and handing pieces to the woman beside him. They looked as though they did not have much. They looked completely content. Vivienne stopped. She leaned her weight against a fence. A memory struck her with a force that nearly took her off her feet. She remembered our first anniversary. We had nothing then. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment. I had no money for a gift, so I built her a jewelry box from scrap wood. I sanded and polished it until it caught the light. She had wept when I put it in her hands. She told me it was the most beautiful thing she had ever been given. Where was that box now? She had thrown it out years later when I bought her a gold one. She had discarded the wood to make space for the gold, and now she had neither. She kept walking. She walked until she reached the downtown streets. She passed a furniture store window. Inside, she could see a living room arrangement that resembled the one in our mansion, the plush velvet sofa, the mock fireplace. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. She could almost feel the warmth radiating back. She remembered the evenings I would sit and rub her feet after a long day. She remembered the tea I would make her when a headache came on. And it hit her with a terrifying clarity that the warmth inside that big house had never come from the furnace. It had come from me. I was the fire in the hearth. I was the walls that held the wind back. And she had spent 40 years working to put that fire out. Now she had finally managed it. She lowered herself onto a bus stop bench. She pulled her knees up to her chest. A cold wind pushed through the city streets and found every gap in her thin dress. She shivered. She shut her eyes and tried to conjure the feeling of my arms around her, but all she found was the hard metal of the bench and the raw, absolute chill of being utterly alone. She was the queen of nothing. Her castle had been made of air all along. It was a Tuesday night when the storm finally broke over North Carolina. The sky went the color of a bruise and rain came sheeting down hard enough to rattle the tin roof of my farmhouse like a drum. It was the kind of rain that scrubs the earth clean, the kind that drives you indoors to find the warmth of a fire. I was settled by the hearth with a book on carpentry when the motion sensor at the front gate triggered the floodlights. I moved to the window. Through the curtain of the downpour, I could make out a figure standing at the iron gate. A woman. She had no raincoat. She was wearing a thin cardigan already drenched through in seconds. The hair that she used to lacquer into a rigid helmet was matted against her skull. She was shaking so badly I could see it from 50 yards. It was Vivian. She did not scream. She did not rattle the bars this time. She simply dropped to her knees in the mud. The expensive Italian leather sandals she could never bring herself to leave behind sank into the red clay. She wrapped both hands around the cold iron bars and pressed her forehead against them. I watched her for a long time. I watched her lips move. I could not make out the words over the thunder, but I knew the script by heart. I had been hearing it for 40 years. "Clifton, please." I saw her lift her eyes toward the house. She found my silhouette in the window. She raised both hands in a gesture of surrender. "Clifton, I am sorry," she screamed. Her voice barely cut through the wind, but it carried the raw pitch of a woman going under. "I was wrong, Clifton. I was so foolish. I got swept up in the money. I got swept up in the image. But I love you. We have been together since we were 20. Do not leave me out here in the cold. I have nowhere to go. The shelter is full. I have not eaten in 2 days." She wiped rain and tears from her face with the back of her hand. "I remember the blue house, Clifton," she cried. I remember the truck. I remember when we had nothing and it was enough. I can be that woman again. Just open the gate. I will cook. I will clean. I will do anything. Just let me come home. It was a masterful performance. A younger version of me might have believed every word. The man I was 6 months ago would already have been running toward the gate with an umbrella, but rain washes away dirt. It does not wash away character, and as I watched her kneeling there in the mud, something caught my eye. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the warm amber glow of the living room lamp behind me. She was not missing her husband. She was missing the heater. She was missing the refrigerator. She was missing the shelter I had always provided. She was sorry the gamble had not paid off, not sorry for the man she had hurt. I stayed at the window. My hand rested against the cool glass. Inside the house was dry. The fire burned steadily. The scent of cedar and roasted coffee moved through the room. It was a sanctuary I had built for myself, a hard-won place of quiet that I had fought a real war to secure. Out in the dark stood the woman who had once been my entire world. My heart gave a dull, painful throb, a phantom ache, muscle memory of love. Part of me wanted to press the button. Part of me wanted to bring her inside, dry her off, and act as if none of it had happened. It is a terrible thing to watch the person you gave your life to reduced to a beggar at your gate. It cuts against every protective instinct a man carries. It cuts against the vows we made. But then I closed my eyes, and a different image took hold. I saw the white ceiling of the ambulance. I felt that crushing weight on my chest. I tasted the plastic of the oxygen mask. I heard the paramedic's voice pleading with her on the phone, and then I heard her voice. Not the desperate voice calling out from the rain, the cold, irritated voice from the party. "We are cutting the cake." That sentence was the lock on the gate. If the positions had been reversed, would she be standing at this window? If I had squandered our fortune and left her with nothing, would she have opened the door? The answer was cold and hard and absolute. She would have left me in the rain without a backward glance. Because to Vivian, people held value only as long as they served a purpose. I no longer served one. I was simply the gatekeeper to the comfort she believed was owed to her. Reason is a cold companion, but it is a faithful one. I understood that opening that gate would not be mercy. It would be surrender. If I let her in, I would not be rescuing her. I would be feeding the very poison that had eaten through our family. She needed to feel the rain. She needed to learn in her bones that consequences cannot be dissolved with a tearful apology at a gate. I turned from the window. I walked to the hallway table. Sitting there was a manila envelope I had prepared days earlier, knowing this moment was coming. I picked it up. It felt light in my hand, but it carried the weight of a final judgment. I called for Rupert. He was staying in the guest cottage helping me with the security. He came in wearing his raincoat flashlight in hand. "Is it time?" Rupert asked, his eyes on the envelope. "It is time," I said. "Do you want to speak with her?" Rupert asked. "No," I said. If I hear her voice up close, I might falter, and I cannot afford to falter. Rupert took the envelope. He understood what it meant. He did not judge me for it. He had seen the scars on my soul over these long months. He gave a single nod and stepped out into the storm. I returned to the window, but I moved back into the shadows where she could not see me. I watched Rupert walk the length of the driveway, his flashlight cutting a straight beam through the dark. Vivienne saw him coming. She rose to her feet. Hope broke across her face. She smoothed her soaking hair back with both hands. She was certain Rupert was coming to unlock the gate. She was certain she had won again, that a few tears were all it ever took to bend Clifton Hargrove. Rupert stopped at the gate. He did not reach for a key. He extended his arm through the bars. Vivienne's expression collapsed. She looked at his hands. There was no key. There was only the envelope. "Mr. Hargrove wanted you to have this," Rupert called out over the wind. Vivienne took it with trembling hands. She tore it open, hungry for a check inside, for a routing number, for a key to a condo somewhere dry. She pulled out what was inside. It was a single Greyhound bus ticket, one-way destination, Columbia, South Carolina. Stapled to the ticket was a brochure. The cover read, Palmetto State Recovery Alliance Rehabilitation and Job Placement Center. Vivienne stared at the ticket. She looked up at Rupert. Her eyes were wide and uncomprehending. "What is this?" she screamed. "A bus ticket. He is sending me away on a bus." There was a note tucked inside as well. I had written it that same morning. Rupert shone his flashlight on the paper so she could read it. Vivienne held the note up to the beam. The ink had begun to run in the rain, but the message was legible enough. You wanted independence, Vivian. Here it is. Colombia has a lower cost of living and plenty of entry-level work in the hospitality industry. You are 66 years old, but you are healthy. You have 2 hands. Use them. Do not come back to Charlotte. There is nothing waiting for you here but memories you chose not to honor. Stand on your own. It is the only gift I have left to give you. Vivian crushed the note in her fist. The sound that came out of her was not grief. It was primal fury, the shriek of a parasite torn loose from its host. I am his wife, she screamed at Rupert. He cannot do this to me. He just did, Rupert said, his voice even and unhurried. The bus leaves at 6 o'clock in the morning from the downtown depot. I suggest you start walking. It is a long way. Rupert turned and walked back toward the house. Vivienne stood gripping the cold iron bars. She looked at the house one final time. She looked at the lit window. She understood then that the glass was unbreakable, the lock unpickable, and the man standing behind it was no longer the Clifton she had been able to bend. She looked at the bus ticket. It was humiliating. It was harsh, but it was also the only rope still hanging within reach. Slowly, something in her gave way. She turned from the gate. She pressed the envelope against her chest to keep it from the rain. She began making her way back down the muddy road toward the dark. Her shoulders were caved. Her expensive sandals were destroyed. I watched her until the darkness took her completely. I did not feel glad. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was a deep, settled sadness, but beneath the sadness was peace. Outside, the storm was still tearing at the roof, but the storm that had lived inside my house for years was finished. I crossed to the fireplace and laid another log on the fire. Sparks shot up the chimney and were taken by the wind. I was alone, but I was warm, and on that night that was sufficient. The smell of fresh cedar sawdust is the finest perfume in the world. It is better than the imported cologne that Garrett used to bathe himself in. It is better than the stale recycled air of a courtroom. It smells like honest work done with your own hands. I was standing in the center of the large workshop I had built on the far edge of my property. Sunlight came pouring through the skylights, catching the dust motes drifting in the air. Around me stood 20 young men. They were not my biological children. They were boys from the inner city, boys who had walked away from school, boys who carried records, boys who reminded me of who I was before construction saved me. "Mr. Clifton," a voice called out. "I think I messed up the dovetail joint." I crossed to the workbench. It was Dion, 19 years old, 2 years served in juvenile detention for theft. He looked up at me with fear written all over his face, bracing himself for a dressing down, expecting me to tell him he was worthless. I picked up the piece of wood. I ran my thumb along the rough edge. "You didn't mess it up, Dion," I said. "You just rushed it. You were chasing the finish line when you should have been walking the journey. Patience is a tool same as the chisel. Force the wood and it splinters. Guide it and it gives." I took the chisel and showed him the proper angle. He watched with an intensity Darnell never once brought to anything. Darnell would have paid somebody else to cut the wood. Dayon wanted to learn how to cut it himself. That right there was the distance between entitlement and character. I stepped back and let the hum of the workshop settle over me. This was the Clifton Hargrove Foundation. 1 year earlier, I had walked out of that courtroom a free man. The first thing I did was liquidate the CH Trust. I sold the office buildings. I sold the commercial strips. I sold the stocks. I gathered up a fortune that had taken me 40 years to assemble. And then I gave 80% of it away. I funded this workshop. I funded scholarships for trade schools. I funded a legal defense fund for the elderly. I held back enough to live comfortably on my farm, to buy groceries, and to keep my truck running. But the millions that had poisoned my family were gone. I had drained the swamp so nothing could breed in it. A reporter from the Charlotte Journal came out to interview me last month. She asked whether I regretted dismantling my empire. She asked if I missed the power. I gave her the honest answer. I told her that power is not a fat bank account. Power is rising in the morning, knowing that nobody wants you in the ground for your money. Power is eating a sandwich without looking over your shoulder. Power is standing in front of a mirror and respecting the man staring back. The workshop whistle blew at 5 o'clock. The boys swept up their stations. They shook my hand on the way out. They called me Mr. Clifton with real respect, not because they were angling for a payout, but because I had given them a future. I locked up the shop and headed back to the main house. The North Carolina evening had cooled off nicely. The crickets were tuning up for the night. My knees ached some, but it was a good ache. The ache of a day that meant something. I stepped into the kitchen. On the oak table sat a small stack of mail. I didn't get many bills these days. My life had gotten simple, but two envelopes stood apart from the rest. One was plain white bearing a stamp from the North Carolina Department of Corrections. The return address was a cell block number. The handwriting was jagged and tight with anger. It was from Darnell. The other envelope was pink. It carried a faint trace of lavender. The handwriting was cursive looped and careful. It was from Renata. The return address was a small apartment complex on the south side of the city, the kind of place known for cheap rent and walls you could hear through. I lifted Darnell's letter. I could feel the heft of it. Probably 5 pages. I already knew what it would say without breaking the seal. He would say he'd found God. He would say he was sorry. He would say he needed commissary money because the other inmates were making his life difficult. He would say he was innocent. He would blame the judge. He would blame the lawyer. He would blame me. I set it down. I picked up Renata's letter. I held it up toward the light. There was a photograph tucked inside, probably a picture of her looking gaunt and sorrowful. She would tell me her friends had all drifted away. She would tell me that working at a diner was hard on her feet. She would ask for a small loan, just to get herself steady again. She would promise to pay it back. I walked to the stone fireplace in the living room. A fire was already going, throwing a warm orange glow across the rug. For just a moment I paused. These were my children. Half my blood ran through their veins. Society tells us a father's love ought to be unconditional. Society tells us forgiveness is owed. But society doesn't live in my house. Society didn't lie on that hospital gurney while my heart gave out. I understood that reading those letters wouldn't do them any good. It would only keep the cycle spinning. If I read them, guilt might creep in. If guilt crept in, I might send money. If I sent money, they would never learn to stand on their own. They would never become like Dion at that workbench learning to cut the wood themselves. I tossed Darnell's letter into the fire. It landed on a burning log. The corner caught instantly. The paper curled and went black. The words of a thief dissolved into smoke and climbed the chimney. I dropped Renata's letter in next. The pink envelope flared up bright and fast. The lavender was swallowed by the smell of burning paper. I watched the photograph inside turn to nothing. I watched the excuses become ash. I did not feel sad. I felt clean. I hadn't abandoned them. I had released them. I had given them the dignity of facing their own consequences. A knock came at the door. I turned from the fire. "Come in," I called. The door swung open and Elwood stepped inside. He was carrying a bottle of aged Scotch whiskey and 2 heavy crystal glasses. He looked a little older than he had a year ago, but his smile was just as sharp. "I saw smoke rising from the chimney," Elwood said, nudging the door shut against the cool night air. "Figured you might be in a celebrating mood." "Every day is a celebration, Elwood," I said. He came to the table and poured 2 drinks. He passed one to me. We moved out to the back porch and settled into the rocking chairs. The moon hung full and low over the pine trees. "I heard about Garrett," Elwood said, taking a sip. "Working at a car wash in Virginia, living in a trailer, he tried to sue his old firm for wrongful termination, but no attorney would touch it." "And Vivienne?" I asked. I kept my eyes on the moon, not on him. "She's in South Carolina," Elwood said, "working as a greeter at one of those big retail stores. Shares a small apartment with 2 other women. She's surviving Clifton. She's actually working." I nodded. That was something. She was finally earning her keep, finally living a life that was real. Elwood looked over at me. "You ever miss at Clifton? The parties, the mansion, the feeling of sitting at the head of the table?" I took a long, slow pull of the scotch. It burned on the way down pleasantly. I looked out at the dark tree line. I thought about the emptiness of the big house. I thought about the silence of that hospital room. And then I thought about the workshop full of boys hungry to learn. I thought about the quiet of my evenings. "I miss nothing, Elwood," I said. "I spent 40 years building a castle on sand. It washed away. Now I'm building on rock." I raised my glass toward him. "To family," Elwood said. I shook my head. "No, Elwood," I said. "Not to family. Family is an accident of biology. You don't choose your family." I clinked my glass against his. The sound rang out clear and true in the night air. "To loyalty," I said. "To the people who show up when the music stops. To the people who stay once the money's gone. To the people who respect you enough to tell you the truth." We drank. The scotch was warm. The night was still. I was Clifton Hargrove. I was a carpenter. I was a teacher. I was a friend. And sitting there in that rocking chair on the porch of the home I had made for myself, I knew at last that I was the richest man in the world. And that is where I leave you tonight, sitting on that porch glass in hand, listening to the quiet that took me a lifetime to earn. This story cost me everything I thought I wanted. It took a heart attack on a stretcher, a family that measured my worth in account numbers, and a long road back to myself before I understood what I had been building wrong all along. I believe God does not waste suffering. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every document signed against me, it all became the raw material for something I could actually be proud of. That is a lesson I carry now, without bitterness. If you have been carrying this story with you, here is what I hope you take away. First, the people who vanish when the money disappears were never really there. Grieve them quickly and move forward. Second, real power is not what you accumulate. It is what you can walk away from without losing yourself. Third, if someone shows you who they are, in your worst moment believe them, completely do not negotiate with that truth. Fourth, it is never too late to rebuild on solid ground. Clifton Hargrove lost an empire and found a life. That trade was worth every penny. If this family, revenge story, spoke to something in your own experience, if you have ever felt overlooked, taken for granted, or quietly written off by the people who should have stood beside you, then this story was made for you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are part of our Adults 50+ community here at Honor Revenge Stories, leave a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you never miss what comes next. I am grateful you were here. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.